They found her in this frozen water at dawn, a baby girl, pale as death, wrapped in burlap like trash. The men who threw her there thought she'd be silent forever. But when Jonah Carter pulled that sack from the creek and heard her whisper, "Mama," everything changed. This is the story of how one word from dying lips brought a broken cowboy back to life, exposed the darkest secrets of the most powerful family in 3 counties, and proved that sometimes the family you fight for matters more than the one you're born into. Stay with me until the end of this journey, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Hope's story travels across this world. The November wind cut across the Texas plains like a blade, fresh from the blacksmith's forge, cold and merciless. Jonah Carter pulled his coat tighter and urged his horse forward along the dry creek bed that snaked through the eastern edge of his property. The land here was harsh, all dust and scattered mesquite, rocks that could break a horse's leg if you weren't careful. It matched the landscape inside him perfectly. 3 years. 3 years since the fever took them both, his wife Sarah and their infant daughter Emma, barely 6 months old. 3 years since he'd buried them on the hill behind the ranch house, beneath the cottonwood tree where he'd proposed to Sarah on a summer evening that felt like it belonged to someone else's life now. 3 years of waking up to silence, of cooking for one, of pretending the work of running cattle and fixing fences was enough to fill the canyon their absence had carved through his chest. It wasn't. Jonah had been 32 when they died. He was 35 now, but felt 70. The other ranchers had stopped inviting him to Sunday dinners. The women in Dust Ridge had stopped bringing casseroles and offering their daughters. Everyone had accepted what Jonah himself had accepted. He was a dead man still walking, going through the motions until his body caught up with his spirit. He rode along the creek bed not because he needed to check the fences. He'd checked them 2 days ago, but because riding was better than sitting in that empty house, staring at the chair where Sarah used to read, at the corner where Emma's cradle had stood before he'd burned it one night in a fit of grief-drunk rage he still couldn't quite remember. The horse, a bay gelding named Copper, suddenly threw his head up and sidestepped, nostrils flaring. "Easy, boy." Jonah tightened the reins, scanning the landscape. Rattlesnake, maybe, or a coyote. But it was mid-morning, wrong time for predators. "What's got into you?" Copper whinnied and backed up 3 steps, ears pinned. That's when Jonah heard it. So faint he almost missed it beneath the wind. A sound like a kitten mewling or a bird in distress. But there was something about it that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, something that bypassed his brain entirely and went straight to some older part of him, the part that remembered Sarah's screams during Emma's difficult birth, the part that would never forget the tiny gasps his daughter made during her final hours. He dismounted fast, ground-tying Copper, and moved toward the sound. The creek was mostly dry this time of year, just scattered pools in the deeper spots where the bedrock dipped. But there'd been rain 3 days ago up in the hills, and a trickle of water still flowed through the channel, maybe 6 inches deep in places. Nothing dangerous. Nothing that should have made his horse spook. The sound came again. Definitely not an animal. Or if it was an animal, it was one in terrible distress. Jonah scrambled down the bank, boots sliding on loose shale. The creek curved here around a pile of driftwood and debris that had washed down during spring floods and never cleared. The water pooled against it, dark and still. And caught against the debris, half submerged, was a burlap sack. The sound was coming from inside it. Jonah's heart stopped, then kicked into a gallop that made his hands shake. He splashed into the water without thinking, without feeling the cold that soaked through his boots and up his pant legs. He grabbed the sack. It was tied at the top with rough twine, and hauled it up. It was heavy, and it was moving. Jesus Christ. His voice came out strangled. His fingers fumbled with the twine, numb from more than just the cold. The knot was tight, swollen from the water. He yanked his knife from his belt and cut through it with one slash. The sack fell open. Inside was a baby. For a moment, Jonah couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare. His brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. A baby. A real, living baby girl, maybe 5 or 6 months old, dressed in a thin cotton dress that was soaked through. Her lips were blue-tinged, her skin pale as milk. Her eyes were closed. She wasn't crying anymore. No, 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 no. Jonah dropped to his knees in the water, heedless of the cold, and pulled her out of the sack. She was limp, her little head lolling. He pressed his ear to her chest. A heartbeat. Faint, too fast, but there. Come on, sweetheart. Come on. He ripped off his coat and wrapped her in it, pulling her against his chest. She was so cold. How long had she been in the water? How long in that sack? Who the hell had done this? The questions could wait. Right now, the only thing that mattered was getting her warm, getting her breathing properly, getting her help. He stood, cradling her carefully, and turned toward Copper. And that's when it happened. The baby's hand, tiny and pale, fingers no bigger around than matchsticks, curled around his thumb where it rested against her cheek, and her eyes fluttered open. They were gray, like storm clouds, and they looked right at him with a focus that seemed impossible for something so small, so close to death. Her lips moved. No sound came out at first, just a small puff of breath against his wrist. Then, so faint he might have imagined it, except he knew he didn't, knew he'd never forget it as long as he lived. Mama. The world tilted. Jonah's vision blurred. For just a second, he wasn't standing in a creek bed holding a stranger's dying baby. He was in his bedroom 3 years ago, holding Emma as she struggled for breath, as Sarah wept beside him, as the fever burned through their daughter and he stood helpless, unable to do anything but watch her slip away. I've got you. His voice broke. I've got you, sweetheart. You're safe now. I promise you're safe. He didn't remember climbing out of the creek bed. Didn't remember mounting Copper with the baby clutched in one arm. All he remembered was riding hell-bent for Dust Ridge, 6 miles of hard gallop with the baby pressed against his chest, feeling her tiny breaths against his shirt, counting each one like a prayer. Please, please let her live. Please don't let me lose another one. The town appeared on the horizon, a scatter of wooden buildings, a church steeple, the false fronts of the stores along Main Street. Dust Ridge wasn't much, maybe 300 people if you counted the surrounding ranches, but it had a doctor. Vernon Paisley, who'd been practicing medicine here since before Jonah was born, who'd delivered him and Sarah both, who'd tried everything to save Emma and failed. Jonah pulled Copper to a skidding stop in front of the doctor's office, a small building wedged between the general store and the telegraph office. He half fell out of the saddle and kicked the door open without bothering to knock. Doc, I need help. The waiting room was empty. A door to the back examination room stood ajar. Jonah pushed through it. Dr. Vernon Paisley looked up from his desk, where he'd been writing notes in a ledger. He was in his 60s, rail-thin, with wire-rimmed spectacles and hands that had set bones and delivered babies and closed the eyes of the dying for 40 years. His expression went from irritation at the interruption to shock in the space of a heartbeat. Jonah? What in God's name? Found her in the creek. She's been in the water. She's cold, barely breathing. Jonah crossed to the examination table and laid the baby down with infinite care, unwrapping his coat. Help her, please. Vernon was already moving, his old body suddenly quick and efficient. He pressed his fingers to the baby's throat, counting her pulse. Grabbed a stethoscope and listened to her chest. Peeled back her eyelids to check her pupils. How long was she in the water? I don't know, I just found her. Jonah's hands clenched into fists at his sides. She was in a burlap sack tied shut. Vernon's jaw tightened, but he didn't look up from his examination. Someone tried to drown her. Yes. Did you see anyone? No, just help her. Please. Vernon moved to a cabinet and started pulling out supplies, blankets, bottles, instruments Jonah didn't recognize. I need you to step back, Jonah. Go into the waiting room. No. The word came out harder than Jonah intended. I'm staying. Vernon glanced at him, and something in the old doctor's eyes softened. He'd been there the night Emma died. He knew what this was doing to Jonah. Fine, but stay out of my way. For the next hour, Jonah stood against the wall and watched Vernon work. The doctor rubbed the baby's limbs to restore circulation, wrapped her in heated blankets, forced water, and then warm milk down her throat drop by drop. She fought at first, turning her head away, making weak mewling sounds. Then she swallowed. And again. and her color started to come back, the blue fading from her lips, a faint pink blooming in her cheeks. "She's strong," Vernon muttered, more to himself than to Jonah. "Lord knows she shouldn't be alive, but she's fighting." "Will she make it?" "I don't know." Vernon straightened up, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked exhausted. "The next 24 hours will tell. She's hypothermic, possibly has water in her lungs, but her heart is strong, and she's taking fluids. That's something." Jonah nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Vernon studied him. "You know we'll have to report this. Someone tried to murder this child, Jonah. Sheriff Morales needs to know." "I know. And she'll need proper care, round-the-clock watching, at least for the next few days. I can keep her here, but I'm one man, and I've got other patients, or—" Vernon hesitated. "We could ask Clara Dawson. She's got experience with infants, and she lives alone since Henry passed. She might be willing." Clara Dawson. Jonah knew her by sight. Everyone in Dust Ridge knew everyone else, but they'd never spoken beyond polite nods at church. She was maybe 30, a widow for 2 years after her husband had been kicked in the head by a horse and died 3 days later. Jonah remembered hearing she'd been pregnant when it happened, but had lost the baby from the shock and grief. She ran a small boarding house now, taking in the occasional drifter or traveling salesman. Kept to herself, mostly, like Jonah did. 2 broken people, he thought. Maybe that's what this baby needs. "Ask her," Jonah said. "But I'm staying too, tonight at least. I need to know she's going to be all right." Vernon nodded slowly. "I'll send word to Clara." And to the sheriff. He moved toward the door, then paused. "Jonah, don't get too attached. Even if she survives, she'll need to be placed somewhere. An orphanage or adopted by a family. You understand that, don't you?" Jonah looked down at the baby on the examination table, wrapped in blankets, her tiny chest rising and falling with each labored breath. Her hand was curled into a loose fist, and as he watched, her fingers flexed, reaching for something that wasn't there. "I understand," he said. He was lying. He knew it even as the words left his mouth. Something had happened when that baby grabbed his thumb and whispered, "Mama." Something had broken open inside him, like ice cracking on a frozen river, like light spilling through a door he'd thought was sealed forever. He couldn't explain it, didn't want to try, but he knew with absolute certainty that he couldn't walk away from her. Not now. Maybe not ever. Clara Dawson arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a basket over one arm and moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to take care of herself. She was dressed plainly in a gray wool dress, her dark hair pinned up beneath a simple bonnet. Her face was heart-shaped, pretty in an understated way, with dark eyes that held a kind of steady sadness Jonah recognized because he saw it every time he looked in a mirror. Vernon met her at the door and spoke to her in low tones. Clara's eyes widened as she listened, her hand rising to her mouth. Then she was moving past him, into the examination room, setting her basket down and approaching the table where the baby lay. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, the poor little thing." She reached out and touched the baby's cheek with one finger, feather-light. The baby stirred and made a small sound, not quite a cry, but close. "She's been in the water?" Clara asked, not looking up. "Yes, ma'am," Jonah said. "I pulled her out of Copper Creek about 2 hours ago. She was in a sack." Clara's hand stilled. She looked up at him then, really looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were darker than he'd thought, nearly black, and they held a mixture of horror and anger that made her look suddenly fierce. "Someone put her in a sack and threw her in the creek." "Yes, ma'am." "To drown her." "Yes, ma'am." Clara's jaw set. She turned back to the baby. "What's her name?" I don't know. She wasn't wearing anything with a name, just the dress." "Then we'll need to give her one." Clara touched the baby's hand, and the tiny fingers immediately wrapped around hers, just like they'd wrapped around Jonah's. "She needs to be someone, not just the baby, or that poor thing. She needs a name." Jonah found himself nodding. "What would you suggest?" Clara was quiet for a moment. Then, so softly he almost missed it. "Hope. Her name should be Hope, because anyone who survives what she's survived deserves to be named after what she represents." "Hope," Jonah repeated. The name felt right in his mouth. "Yeah, that's perfect." Vernon cleared his throat. Well, now that we've got that settled, Clara, I asked you here because this baby needs constant care for the next few days at minimum. Watching, feeding, keeping her warm. I can't do it alone. Would you be willing to help? Clara didn't hesitate. Of course, whatever she needs. I'll help too, Jonah said. Both Vernon and Clara looked at him in surprise. You've got a ranch to run, Vernon pointed out. My foreman can handle it for a few days. Jonah met the doctor's gaze steadily. I found her. I pulled her out of that creek. I'm not walking away now. He expected Vernon to argue, but the old doctor just nodded. All right then. Clara, I'll need you to stay here tonight. Keep Hope warm and fed. Jonah, you can help, but try to get some rest too. It's going to be a long night. I'll sleep when she's out of danger, Jonah said. Clara looked at him again, and this time there was something different in her eyes. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. You've lost someone, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Jonah's throat tightened. My wife and daughter. 3 years ago. I lost my husband 2 years ago. And a baby. Clara's voice was steady, but her hand trembled slightly where it rested on the examination table. So I know what it's like to feel helpless, and I know what it's like to want a chance to save something when you couldn't save what mattered most. The room was very quiet. Even Vernon seemed to sense that something important was happening, some understanding passing between two people who'd been carrying the same weight alone for too long. We're going to save her, Jonah said. Clara nodded. Yes, we are, but The night was endless. Vernon set them up in the examination room with a makeshift bed for Clara, a cot dragged in from the back room, and a chair for Jonah. Hope was placed in a padded drawer lined with blankets, the closest thing to a cradle Vernon had. They took turns watching her, feeding her drops of warmed milk every hour, checking her breathing, her color, her temperature. Around midnight, her breathing became labored. Clara woke Jonah. He'd been dozing in the chair, with a hand on his shoulder. Something's wrong, she whispered. Jonah was on his feet instantly. Hope's face was pinched, her lips pressed together. Her chest rose and fell too fast, too shallow. A rattling sound came from her throat. Get Vernon, Jonah said. Clara was already moving. She returned moments later with the doctor, still in his nightshirt, medical bag in hand. Vernon listened to Hope's chest, his expression grave. Fluid in the lungs. I was afraid of this. He pulled out a glass tube and other instruments. We need to help her cough it up. This is going to be unpleasant. What followed was one of the hardest things Jonah had ever watched. Vernon worked to clear Hope's airways, and the baby cried, a weak, pitiful sound that tore at Jonah's heart. Clara held Hope's hand the entire time, murmuring soft reassurances. It's all right, sweetheart. We've got you. You're safe. You're safe. Finally, Hope coughed hard and brought up water and mucus. Vernon cleaned her mouth and nose, and gradually her breathing eased. The rattle faded. Her color improved. She's through the worst of it, Vernon said, sagging with relief. If she made it through that, she'll make it through anything. Clara was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. She didn't seem to notice. She just kept holding Hope's hand, kept murmuring those soft words. You're safe. You're safe now. Jonah found his own eyes stinging. He blinked hard and turned away, pretending to need something from his coat pocket. By dawn, Hope was sleeping peacefully. Her color was good, her breathing steady. Clara had fallen asleep sitting up on the cot, her hand still stretched toward the makeshift cradle. Jonah watched them both in the gray morning light filtering through the window, and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. The real thing, not just the name. Maybe he wasn't as dead as he'd thought. Sheriff Tom Morales showed up just after breakfast. He was a solid man in his 40s, with a thick mustache and eyes that missed nothing. He'd held the position of sheriff for 10 years, and before that had been a Texas Ranger. People respected him because he was fair, and because he didn't back down from trouble, no matter how rich or powerful the troublemaker. Vernon met him at the door and filled him in on the situation. Jonah heard their low voices from the examination room where he was helping Clara feed Hope her morning milk. The baby was much stronger this morning, taking the milk eagerly, her gray eyes focusing on his face with an intensity that seemed remarkable for something so small. "She knows you," Clara said softly. "Look how she watches you." It was true. Every time Jonah moved, Hope's eyes tracked him. And when he held the bottle for her, her tiny hand came up and rested against his fingers, holding on. The door opened and Morales stepped in, hat in hand. He looked at the baby, and his expression hardened. "Jesus, Mary and Joseph, she's so small." "About 6 months, I'd estimate," Vernon said from behind him. "Maybe a little younger." Morales approached the table slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter something. He looked down at Hope with an expression Jonah couldn't quite read, anger and pity, and something else mixed together. "And someone tried to drown her." "Yes," Jonah said, "tied her in a burlap sack and threw her in Copper Creek." "You didn't see anyone?" "No. The creek runs for miles through empty rangeland. Could have happened anywhere along it." Morales was quiet for a moment. Then, "Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Strangers in the area? Anyone acting suspicious?" Jonah shook his head. "Nothing. It's been quiet." "I'll start asking around. Someone must know something." Morales looked at Clara. "What about you, Mrs. Dawson? Have you heard any gossip about a pregnant woman or someone who recently gave birth?" Clara frowned, thinking. "No, nothing, but—" She hesitated. "But what?" "Well, it's just... If someone wanted to hide a pregnancy, they could, especially if they had money and privacy. They could go away for a few months, claim to be visiting relatives. No one would question it. So we're looking for someone with means," Morales said. "Someone who could afford to keep secrets." "Or someone poor and desperate," Jonah pointed out. "Someone who couldn't afford another mouth to feed." "Maybe." Morales didn't sound convinced. "But in my experience, poor folk don't usually go to the trouble of riding out to a creek to dispose of a baby. They leave them on church steps or at orphanages. He gestured to Hope. "This feels like someone covering up something they didn't want found. Someone with a reputation to protect." A chill ran down Jonah's spine. He looked down at Hope, who had finished her milk and was starting to drift off, her hand still clutching his finger. "You think someone from town did this?" "I think someone connected to town did this," Morales said carefully. "And I'm going to find out who." Over the next 3 days, Hope grew stronger. The blue tinge left her skin entirely. She started crying with proper lung power when she was hungry or wet. She began tracking movement more alertly, responding to voices and touch. Vernon declared her out of immediate danger, though he warned she'd need watching for another week or two to ensure she didn't develop pneumonia or other complications. During those 3 days, something else happened, something Jonah didn't have words for, but Clara did. It was late on the 3rd night. Jonah had dozed off in his chair while Clara was feeding Hope. He woke to find Clara standing beside him, Hope cradled in her arms. "She won't settle for me," Clara said softly. "She keeps fussing, but I think she wants you." Jonah took Hope carefully. The moment she was in his arms, she quieted, her head tucking against his chest, her hand fisting in his shirt. Within seconds, she was asleep. Clara sat down on the edge of the cot, watching them. "You know what's happening, don't you?" "What?" "She's bonding with you, and you're bonding with her." Clara's voice was gentle. "You know you can't keep her, Jonah. When this is over, when they find out who did this, she'll have to be placed somewhere, an orphanage or—" "I know." Jonah looked down at Hope's sleeping face. In sleep, she looked peaceful, innocent. She had no idea how close she'd come to death, no idea that someone had wanted her gone badly enough to try to murder her. But right now, she needs someone. And I can be that someone. For now. Clara nodded slowly. "I understand. I feel it too." She paused. "It's not wrong to care about her, you know, even if you can't keep her. It's not wrong to want to protect her." "Feels wrong," Jonah admitted. "Feels like I'm trying to replace Emma." "You're not." Clara's voice was firm. "Emma was your daughter, and nothing will ever change that. Hope is a child who needs help, that's all. You're allowed to care about both of them." Jonah wanted to believe her, But the guilt sat heavy in his chest anyway, mixing with the fierce protectiveness he felt every time he looked at Hope. The door to the examination room opened quietly. Vernon stuck his head in, then entered when he saw they were both awake. He looked tired. He'd been running himself ragged between his regular patients and checking on Hope. "I'm glad you're both here," he said. "Sheriff Morales just left. He wanted me to pass along some information." Jonah straightened. "What information?" Vernon sat down heavily in the room's other chair. "He's been making inquiries, quietly, so as not to spook anyone. And he's learned something concerning." "Tell us," Claire said. Vernon glanced at Hope, then back at them. "There's been talk, very quiet talk, the kind you only hear if you know the right people to ask, about Judge Silas Blackthorne's daughter." The name hung in the air like a physical presence. Silas Blackthorne. Everyone within 100 miles knew that name. He was the wealthiest man in 3 counties, owned half the land around Dust Ridge and most of the land beyond it. He ran cattle, owned the bank, had connections in Austin and Washington. He'd been a judge for 20 years, and in that time he'd built an empire through a combination of shrewd business sense and ruthless elimination of anyone who stood in his way. He was also known for his vicious pride and his obsession with reputation. "Lydia Blackthorne," Clara breathed. "I'd heard she went away for a while, visiting an aunt in San Antonio, I thought." "That's what everyone was supposed to think," Vernon said. "But according to what Morales heard, she wasn't visiting an aunt. She was hiding a pregnancy." Jonah felt his arms tighten instinctively around Hope. "You think Hope is Silas Blackthorne's granddaughter?" "I think it's possible," Vernon said carefully. "The timeline matches. Lydia left town about 10 months ago. Returned 3 months ago, looking thin and ill. A few weeks later, someone tried to drown a baby in Copper Creek." He shook his head. "If it's true, if Hope is connected to the Blackthorne family, this is going to get very dangerous, very fast." "Why?" Claire asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Because Silas Blackthorne doesn't let anything threaten his reputation," Vernon said. "If word got out that his unmarried daughter had a child, it would be a scandal. And Silas doesn't tolerate scandals. He eliminates them." The room fell silent. Outside, somewhere in the town, a dog barked. A wagon rattled past, normal sounds of normal life. But in this room, they had just stepped into something far from normal. "What do we do?" Jonah asked. "We wait," Vernon said. "Morales is still gathering information, but he wanted you both to know, be careful. If the Blackthorns are involved, they'll be watching, and they won't want this baby found alive." After Vernon left, Jonah sat holding Hope for a long time. Clara remained on the cot, neither of them speaking. They didn't need to. They both understood what they'd gotten themselves into. Finally, Clara said, "We should give her back to them. If she's really Lydia's daughter, she should be with her mother." "Her mother tried to kill her," Jonah said flatly. "Or had someone else do it. Either way, she wanted this baby dead. We don't know that for certain. Maybe Lydia didn't know. Maybe it was Silas acting without her knowledge. Does it matter?" Jonah looked down at Hope. "Either way, that family wanted her gone. And now she's here, alive, safe. I'm not giving her back so they can finish what they started." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're right. Of course you're right. I just..." She trailed off. "What?" "I'm scared," Clara admitted. "Silas Blackthorne is a powerful man, Jonah. If he wants this baby dead, what chance do we have of protecting her?" Jonah thought about that question, thought about Sarah and Emma, about how he'd been unable to save them, about how he'd spent 3 years wishing he'd died with them, thought about the feel of Hope's tiny hand curled around his thumb, about her whisper of mama, about the way she'd fought to stay alive against all odds. "We'll figure it out," he said. "We have to." Because the alternative, handing Hope over to the people who'd tried to kill her, was unthinkable. The next morning, everything changed. Jonah woke to urgent knocking on the door. He'd fallen asleep in the chair again, Hope sleeping in his arms. Across the room, Clara sat up on the cot, instantly alert. Vernon appeared a moment later, followed by a woman Jonah had never seen before. She was Mexican, maybe 40 years old, dressed in a simple servant's dress. Her face was drawn with fear, and she kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to burst through the door behind her. "This is Rosa Alvarez," Vernon said quickly. "She worked for the Blackthorn family. She has information about the baby." Rosa looked at Hope, and her eyes filled with tears. "Dios mío, she's alive. She's really alive." "You know her?" Clara asked, standing. Rosa nodded, wringing her hands. "I was there when she was born. I helped Señorita Lydia through the labor. I thought the baby was dead. They told me she was dead." "Who told you?" Jonah demanded. "The judge, Judge Blackthorn. He said the baby came too early, that she didn't survive. He had her taken away while Señorita Lydia was still unconscious from the birth." Rosa's voice shook. "But I heard crying. I heard a baby crying as they carried her out. And then nothing." "Silas ordered the baby killed," Vernon said grimly. "See, I didn't want to believe it, but last week I overheard the judge talking to a man, a drunk he sometimes hires for bad things. The judge told him the job was done, the baby disposed of, that no one would ever find it." Rosa looked at them with desperate eyes. "But you did. You found her. Gracias a Dios." Jonah's jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "Does Lydia know?" "No, she thinks the baby died at birth. The judge told her it was for the best, that God took the child because she was born in sin." Rosa's hands twisted together. "But that's a lie. The baby was healthy. She was perfect." "Who's the father?" Clara asked. Rosa hesitated. "A ranch hand, Elias Navarro. Sports. Good man. Worked hard. Loved Señorita Lydia truly. But the judge said he wasn't good enough. When he found out about the pregnancy, he had Elias beaten and run off. Told everyone the boy stole from him and ran away to Mexico, but I think—" She swallowed hard. "I think the judge killed him." The room fell silent. Jonah looked down at Hope, who was starting to wake up, blinking sleepily. This tiny, innocent child was at the center of a web of violence and lies that had already claimed at least one life, and nearly claimed hers. "Why are you telling us this?" Jonah asked Rosa. "Why come forward now?" "Because I can't live with it anymore," Rosa said simply. "I helped bring that baby into the world. I held her when she first cried. And then I stood by and did nothing while they tried to murder her. I have to make this right, even if it costs me everything." "It might," Vernon warned. "If Silas Blackthorn finds out you talked—" "I know." Rosa straightened her shoulders. "But some things matter more than being safe. She matters." She pointed to Hope. "She deserves to live. She deserves justice." Morales appeared in the doorway. He must have been waiting outside. "Mrs. Alvarez has agreed to give a formal statement. We're going to need yours too, Jonah. And yours, Clara. I'm building a case against Silas Blackthorn." "A case?" Jonah looked at the sheriff. "You really think you can make charges stick against the most powerful man in the county?" Morales' expression was grim but determined. "With Mrs. Alvarez's testimony and the physical evidence, the baby herself, I can try. But I'll need all of you to be willing to stand up in court and tell what you know." "Of course," Clara said immediately. Jonah nodded. "Whatever it takes." "Good." Morales turned to Rosa. "Let's get that statement written down, and then we need to figure out how to keep you safe. Blackthorn has eyes everywhere." As they filed out, leaving Jonah and Clara alone with Hope, Clara moved to stand beside Jonah's chair. She looked down at the baby, who was yawning and stretching, her little fists opening and closing. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Clara said quietly. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." "Probably," Jonah agreed. But even as he said it, even as he understood the danger they were walking into, he felt something solid settle in his chest. Purpose. Direction. For 3 years he'd been drifting, going through the motions of living without really being alive. Now suddenly he had a reason to fight. This baby, Hope, needed him. And he wasn't going to let her down, not like he'd let Emma down. This time he was going to save her, whatever it cost. The days that followed Rosa's confession passed in a blur of tension and careful planning. Sheriff Morales moved Rosa to a safe house on the outskirts of town, a small cabin owned by his brother-in-law where she could stay hidden while he built his case. Meanwhile, Jonah and Clara continued caring for Hope in Dr. Vernon's office, though now they did so with a new awareness that every shadow might hide a threat, every stranger might be one of Blackthorn's men. Hope herself seemed blissfully unaware of the danger surrounding her. She grew stronger each day, her cries becoming more robust, her grip firmer. She'd started smiling, real smiles that lit up her whole face, and the first time she smiled at Jonah, something in his chest cracked open even wider. Clara had been there too, and she'd laughed with pure delight, clapping her hands together like a child herself. "She knows you love her," Clara had said, watching Jonah hold the baby with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his weathered rancher's hands. "She feels safe with you." Jonah hadn't known what to say to that. Love seemed like too big a word, too dangerous. But if he was honest with himself, he knew Clara was right. Somewhere in the space between pulling Hope from that creek and watching her fight her way back to health, he'd fallen completely in love with her. And he wasn't the only one. Clara had taken to singing to Hope in the evenings, soft Spanish lullabies she said her own mother had sung to her. She'd sewn new dresses for the baby from fabric she'd bought at the general store, delicate little things with careful stitching. She'd started talking about what Hope would need as she grew, toys, a proper cradle, books to read to her. They were acting like parents, both of them knew it. Neither of them acknowledged it out loud. On the 5th day after Rosa's confession, Morales returned to the doctor's office with news. His expression was grave as he removed his hat and stood just inside the doorway, clearly reluctant to come further in. "I've got confirmation," he said without preamble. "Lydia Blackthorn gave birth 7 months ago. I tracked down the midwife who attended her. A woman named Martha Green lives over in Sweetwater. She confirmed everything Rosa said. Healthy baby girl, born in the Blackthorn mansion. Silas paid her $300 to keep quiet and tell anyone who asked that the baby died." Clara's hand went to her throat. $300? That's more than most people make in a year. "Silas Blackthorn doesn't do anything by half measures," Morales said. "Martha's willing to testify, by the way. She's got a conscience, says the money's been eating at her. But here's where it gets complicated." He paused, and Jonah recognized the look on his face. "Bad news coming." "News? What is it?" Jonah asked, instinctively pulling Hope a little closer. She was sleeping against his shoulder, one tiny fist clutched in his shirt. "Judge Blackthorn knows the baby's alive," Morales said flatly. "Word got back to him somehow. Maybe someone saw you ride into town with her. Maybe he's had people watching. Doesn't matter how. Point is, he knows." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vernon, who'd been organizing supplies across the room, went still. Clara took a step closer to Jonah and Hope, as if her proximity could provide additional protection. "What's he gonna do?" Jonah asked, though he already knew the answer wouldn't be good. "He's lawyered up, hired Theodore Crane from Austin, slickest, meanest attorney in Texas. They're claiming Hope is his granddaughter and that she was kidnapped from the family property. They're saying you took her, Jonah, and that you've been holding her against the family's wishes." "That's insane," Clara burst out. "Jonah saved her life. She was in a creek in a sack." "I know that. You know that. But Blackthorn's got money and influence, and Crane's already filed papers with the county. They're demanding Hope be returned to the Blackthorn family immediately." Morales' jaw tightened. "I've managed to delay it for now, claimed we need to verify the baby's identity first, run a proper investigation. But I can't hold them off forever. Maybe a week, 2 at most." Jonah felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "They tried to kill her. I believe you, but proving it in court is another matter. Right now it's your word and Rosa's and a midwife's against a judge with a sterling reputation and unlimited resources." Morales looked genuinely pained. "I'm sorry, Jonah. I'm doing everything I can, but the system's rigged in favor of men like Blackthorn. Always has been." "There has to be something we can do," Clara said desperately. "We can't just hand her over to the people who tried to murder her." "I'm working on it," Morales promised. "But in the meantime, you all need to be careful. Very careful. Blackthorn's not above taking matters into his own hands if the law doesn't move fast enough for his liking." After Morales left, the three of them sat in heavy silence. Hope woke up and started fussing, and Clara took her from Jonah to feed her. Jonah watched them, Clara murmuring softly to the baby, Hope's little hands patting at the bottle. and felt a fierce protective rage building in his chest. "I won't let them take her," he said quietly. Vernon looked up from where he'd been staring at his hands. "Jonah, you can't fight the law, and you can't fight Silas Blackthorne. He'll destroy you." "Let him try." "He won't just destroy you," Vernon said, his voice sharper now. "He'll destroy Clara too, and anyone else who stands with you. That's how men like Blackthorne operate. They don't just win, they obliterate their opposition so thoroughly that no one dares challenge them again." So what do you suggest?" Jonah's voice was hard. "We just give up? Hand hope over and pretend none of this happened?" "I'm suggesting you think very carefully about what you're willing to risk," Vernon said. "Your ranch, your reputation, your freedom, maybe even your life. Because that's what you'll be putting on the line if you go up against Blackthorne." Clara looked up from feeding Hope. Her face was pale but determined. "I think we need to hear from someone who's been silent through all of this." "Who?" Jonah asked. "Lydia Blackthorne." Clara's voice was steady. "She's Hope's mother. She deserves to know her daughter is alive, and maybe, just maybe, she'll stand with us against her father." Vernon shook his head. "That's a dangerous gamble. For all we know, Lydia was complicit in trying to kill the baby. Or even if she wasn't, she might not be strong enough to stand up to Silas." "But she might be," Clara insisted. "Rosa said Lydia loved Elias, loved him truly. A woman who could love like that might also love her child enough to fight for her." She looked down at Hope, who had finished eating and was gazing up at Clara with those solemn gray eyes. "I know if this were my baby, if I'd thought she was dead and then learned she was alive, nothing in heaven or earth could stop me from getting to her." Jonah saw the pain flicker across Clara's face as she spoke, remembered what Vernon had said about her losing her own child. He stood and crossed to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You really think it could work?" "I think it's our only chance," Clara said. "If Lydia testifies that her father tried to kill Hope against her will, that changes everything. Suddenly it's not about custody or kidnapping, it's about attempted murder and conspiracy." "Getting to Lydia won't be easy," Vernon pointed out. "Silas keeps her on a tight leash. She rarely leaves the estate, and when she does, she's usually accompanied." "Then we'll have to be smart about it," Clara said. She looked at Jonah. "Are you willing to try?" Jonah thought about it for maybe 2 seconds. "Yes." The plan came together over the next day. Rosa, speaking from her safe house through messages delivered by Morales, provided crucial information. Lydia attended church every Sunday at the small Catholic chapel on the north edge of town. It was one of the few places Silas allowed her to go, probably because he considered it respectable and because Father Miguel had been the family's priest for 20 years. Silas himself never attended, claimed he was Methodist when anyone asked, though the truth was he didn't practice any religion except the worship of money and power. This coming Sunday, Rosa said, would be perfect. Silas was scheduled to travel to Austin on business, leaving Lydia with only a single guard, an older man named Thomas who'd been with the family for years and who, according to Rosa, had a soft heart beneath his stern exterior. Thomas knew Elias, Rosa's message said. They were friends. If anyone in that house mourns the boy, it's Thomas. He might be sympathetic. So the plan was set. Sunday morning, while the town gathered for services at the main Protestant church, Jonah and Clara would take Hope to the Catholic chapel. They'd wait until after Mass, then approach Lydia and tell her everything. It was risky. If Lydia sided with her father, they'd be walking straight into a trap. But if she sided with them, if she could be convinced to stand up to Silas, they might actually have a chance. Saturday night, Jonah couldn't sleep. He sat in the examination room watching Hope sleep in her makeshift cradle, his mind turning over all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. Clara had gone back to her boarding house hours ago to prepare, leaving Jonah alone with his thoughts and the baby. The door opened quietly, and Jonah looked up to find Vernon entering with 2 cups of coffee. The old doctor handed one to Jonah and settled into the other chair with a heavy sigh. "Couldn't sleep either?" Jonah asked. "I've been a doctor for 40 years, Vernon said. Delivered over 300 babies, including you and Sarah. Saved more lives than I can count. Lost some too." He stared into his coffee. "But I've never been in a situation quite like this one. never had to choose between following the law and doing what's right when they're pointing in opposite directions. You think we're wrong to fight this? Vernon was quiet for a long moment. Then, no, I think you're absolutely right to fight, but that doesn't mean you're going to win. And I'm scared of what's going to happen to all of you if you lose. Well, we're not going to lose, Jonah said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Jonah, listen to me. Vernon leaned forward, his weathered face serious in the lamplight. I knew your father, good man, honest man, and I know you inherited that from him, that stubborn streak that won't let you walk away when someone needs help. But your father also knew when to pick his battles, knew that sometimes you have to accept what you can't change. So I should just accept that a baby was thrown away like trash? Accept that the people who did it will get away with it because they're rich and powerful? Jonah shook his head. I can't do that. Even if fighting means you lose everything? Jonah looked down at Hope. In sleep, she looked so peaceful, so innocent. One tiny hand was curled near her face, and as he watched, she made a small sound and shifted, settling deeper into her blankets. His heart clenched. I already lost everything 3 years ago, he said quietly. When Sarah and Emma died, I lost everything that mattered. I've been walking around dead ever since, just going through the motions. But Hope? He had to stop, swallow hard against the emotion rising in his throat. Hope made me feel alive again, made me remember what it's like to care about something, to want to protect something. If fighting for her means I lose my ranch or my reputation or whatever else, so be it. At least I'll have lived for something that mattered. Vernon studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Sarah would be proud of you. I think you should know that. The words hit Jonah harder than he expected. His vision blurred, and he had to blink several times to clear it. You think so? I know so. She was a fighter too, in her quiet way. Never backed down when she believed in something. Vernon stood, his joints creaking. Get some rest if you can. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. After Vernon left, Jonah sat holding his coffee and watching Hope sleep until the sky outside started to lighten with dawn. He must have dozed at some point because the next thing he knew, Clara was shaking his shoulder gently. Jonah, it's time. He blinked awake, momentarily disoriented, then remembered. Sunday, the church, Lydia. He stood quickly, nearly spilling his long cold coffee. Is she ready? Clara nodded toward Hope, who was awake and freshly dressed in one of the little gowns Clara had made. White cotton with delicate blue embroidery around the collar. She's perfect, and she's had her breakfast, so she should be content for a few hours. Jonah picked up Hope, who immediately grabbed his thumb and held on tight. The gesture, so familiar now, steadied him. Let's do this. They left through the back door of Vernon's office to avoid being seen. The morning was cool and gray, clouds hanging low over the town. Perfect weather for what they were about to attempt. The overcast sky would keep people indoors longer, give them better cover. The Catholic chapel was on the far side of town, a small adobe building with a bell tower and a modest cemetery beside it. They approached from the back, moving quickly but not running, trying to look like any couple taking their baby for a morning walk. A few people were around, a boy delivering newspapers, a woman sweeping her front porch, but no one paid them much attention. Mass had started by the time they reached the chapel. They could hear Father Miguel's voice through the open door, the murmured responses of the congregation. Clara had attended this church occasionally since Henry died, said she found the rituals comforting even though she'd been raised Methodist. She knew the rhythm of the service, knew they had maybe 30 minutes before people started filing out. They waited in the cemetery, standing among the weathered headstones, Hope quiet in Jonah's arms. The minutes crawled by. Jonah's heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. What if Lydia didn't come? What if she'd stayed home? What if the guard refused to let them approach? Then the church bell rang, signaling the end of Mass, and people began emerging. First came the families with young children, then the older couples, then the single women who always stayed after to chat with Father Miguel. And finally, near the end, a young woman in a dark blue dress with a black lace mantilla covering her hair. Lydia Blackthorne. Jonah recognized her from the few times he'd seen her in town, though she looked different now. Thinner, paler, with dark circles under her eyes that even the mantilla couldn't hide. She moved slowly, as if exhausted, and her hands were clasped so tightly together that her knuckles showed white. Behind her walked an older man with iron-gray hair and a weathered face. Thomas, the guard. He stayed a respectful few paces back, giving Lydia the illusion of privacy while still keeping her in sight. Clara touched Jonah's arm. Now. They stepped out from behind a large oak tree, moving to intercept Lydia before she could reach the road where a carriage waited. Lydia saw them and stopped, her eyes widening slightly. Thomas immediately stepped forward, one hand moving to his belt where Jonah could see the outline of a pistol. "Miss Blackthorne," Clara said quickly, her voice low but carrying, "please, we need to speak with you. It's about your baby." Lydia went absolutely still. All the color drained from her face. "My baby is dead," she whispered. "No," Jonah said. He shifted Hope slightly so Lydia could see her. "She's not." For a moment nobody moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then Lydia made a sound, a choked gasp that was almost a sob, and took a stumbling step forward. Thomas grabbed her arm, holding her back. "Miss Lydia, your father said—" "Let me go, Thomas!" Lydia's voice was stronger now, sharp with a desperation that cut through the morning air. "Let me go right now." Thomas hesitated, clearly torn. Then his eyes went to Hope, and something shifted in his expression. Pain, maybe, or recognition. He released Lydia's arm. Lydia crossed the distance between them in 3 quick steps. Up close, Jonah could see she was younger than he'd thought, maybe 22 or 23, and her eyes, when they locked onto Hope, were the same storm gray as the baby's. "How?" Lydia's hands came up, trembling, hovering near Hope but not quite touching, as if she was afraid the baby might vanish like smoke. "How is this possible? They told me she died. Papa said she was born too early, that she never breathed." "Your father lied," Clara said gently. "She was healthy, and he tried to have her killed." Lydia's face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "No, no, he wouldn't." "He did," Jonah said. "Someone tied her in a sack and threw her in Copper Creek. I found her there 5 days ago, barely alive. Your father's housemaid, Rosa, confirmed everything. We have witnesses." Lydia was shaking now, her whole body trembling. She reached out with one tentative hand and touched Hope's cheek. The baby turned toward the touch, and Lydia made that choking sound again. "My baby. Mi hija. Oh God, my little girl." Hope stared up at Lydia with those solemn gray eyes. Then, as they all watched, the baby smiled, the same bright, whole-face smile she'd been giving Jonah and Clara for the past few days. Lydia broke. She collapsed to her knees right there in the cemetery, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Clara knelt beside her immediately, one arm around her shoulders. Thomas stood frozen, staring at the scene with an expression of absolute horror. "Miss Lydia," he said hoarsely, "is it true? Did the judge try to kill your baby?" Lydia looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know. Thomas, I swear I didn't know. He told me she was dead. He told me God took her because I'd sinned, because I'd loved Elias, but she was alive. She was alive, and he tried to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Thomas's face hardened. Jonah recognized that look. He'd seen it on soldiers during the war, the moment when a man realized he'd been following the wrong orders, fighting for the wrong cause. "Elias," Thomas said quietly. "The judge said he ran off." "But he didn't, did he?" Lydia shook her head, still crying. "Papa had him killed. I know he did. Elias would never have left me. Never." "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph." Thomas removed his hat, running a hand through his gray hair. He looked suddenly old, worn down by the weight of too many terrible truths. "I should have known, should have questioned, but I was loyal to your father for so long. He looked at Hope. "I'm sorry, Miss Lydia. I'm so damn sorry." "You didn't know," Lydia whispered. She turned back to Hope, reaching up with shaking hands. May I hold her?" Jonah glanced at Clara, who nodded. He carefully transferred Hope into Lydia's arms. The baby went willingly, and when Lydia pulled her close, burying her face in Hope's soft hair, the baby made a contented sound and patted at Lydia's cheek with one tiny hand. I named her Emma, Lydia said softly, her voice muffled against Hope's head. When she was born, in those few seconds before they took her away and told me she was dead, I looked at her and knew her name should be Emma, after my grandmother. Jonah felt like he'd been struck by lightning. Emma, his daughter's name, and now Hope's real name. The coincidence seemed too perfect, too impossible. He looked at Clara and saw his own shock reflected in her face. We've been calling her Hope, Clara said quietly. But Emma is a beautiful name. Lydia held the baby, Emma, for a long time, swaying slightly, murmuring in Spanish. Gradually her sobs quieted, though tears continued to stream down her face. When she finally looked up, her expression had transformed. The exhausted, defeated woman who'd walked out of the church was gone. In her place was someone fierce, someone determined. Tell me everything, she said. So they did. Right there in the cemetery with Thomas standing guard and the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds, Jonah and Clara told Lydia the whole story. Finding the baby in the creek, Rosa's confession, Sheriff Morales' investigation, Silas's counterattack, claiming Hope, Emma, had been kidnapped. The plan to fight for custody, to expose what Silas had done. Lydia listened to all of it, her arms wrapped protectively around her daughter, her face growing harder and more resolved with each detail. When they finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, "He has to pay for this," she said flatly. "My father has to pay for what he did to my baby, to Elias, to all of us." "We're trying," Jonah said, "but he's powerful and he's got lawyers." "I'll testify," Lydia cut him off. "I'll tell everyone what he did. How he kept me locked up during my pregnancy, how he threatened to disown me if I ever breathed a word about Elias, how he told me my baby was dead and wouldn't even let me see the body, said it would be too traumatic." Her voice shook with fury. "I believed him. I actually believed him. I mourned her, and all the time she was alive, and he'd tried to murder her." "Your testimony could make all the difference," Clara said. "But Lydia, you need to understand, if you stand against your father, he'll turn on you. He'll try to destroy you too." "Let him try." Lydia kissed Emma's forehead. "I have my daughter back. That's all that matters. He already took everything else from me, my love, my freedom, my will. He made me a prisoner in my own house, but he can't take this. I won't let him." Thomas cleared his throat. "Miss Lydia, if you testify against your father, you can't go back to the estate. He'll never let you leave again. You'll need somewhere safe to stay." Lydia looked uncertain for the first time. "I don't have anywhere. No money of my own. No family except Papa. My mother died when I was 12, and he drove off everyone else who might have cared about me." "You can stay with me," Clara said immediately. "I run a boarding house. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe, and you'll have help with Emma. Hope. She paused, looking embarrassed. "What should we call her?" Lydia looked down at the baby, then at Jonah and Clara. "You saved her life. You've been caring for her, loving her. What name did you give her?" "Hope," Jonah said, "because she survived the impossible." "Hope Emma," Lydia said softly, trying out the combination. The baby made a cooing sound, and Lydia smiled through her tears. "Perfect. Her name is Hope Emma Carter Blackthorne." The addition of Carter to the name hit Jonah like a physical blow. He started to protest. He had no claim to this child, no right to have his name attached to hers, but Clara put a hand on his arm, stopping him. "You pulled her from that creek," Lydia said, looking at Jonah with an intensity that pinned him in place. "You breathed life back into her when she should have died. In every way that matters, you're her father, and I want her to have your name alongside mine and my father's. I want everyone to know that you saved her." Jonah couldn't speak. His throat had closed up entirely. He just nodded. Thomas had been pacing while they talked, clearly agitated. Now he stopped and faced Lydia. "Miss Lydia, I need to say something. I've worked for your father for 15 years, been loyal to him through everything. But this," he gestured helplessly, "this is too much. What he did to you, to Elias, to this innocent baby, it's evil. And I can't be part of it anymore." "Thomas, I'll testify too," Thomas continued. "I overheard things over the years, conversations I wasn't supposed to hear, about Elias disappearing, about how your father had people looking for him to finish the job. I didn't understand then, thought maybe he meant running him out of the county, but now, he shook his head. Now I understand what he really meant, and I'll tell a jury everything I know. Lydia stood, still holding Hope Emma carefully. Thank you, Thomas, for everything, for being my friend when I had none, for this. They made plans quickly. Thomas would take the carriage back to the Blackthorn estate and tell Silas that Lydia had felt ill after church and gone home with friends. That would buy them a few hours before Silas realized she was gone. In that time, Clara would get Lydia settled at the boarding house, and Jonah would find Sheriff Morales and tell him they had a witness. It was risky. It was dangerous. But it was their best shot. As they were preparing to leave, Father Miguel emerged from the chapel. The old priest took in the scene, the crying young woman holding a baby, the grim-faced guard, Jonah and Clara standing protectively nearby, and his expression shifted from confusion to understanding. Lydia, he said gently, approaching. Is this your child? Lydia nodded, unable to speak. Father Miguel looked at Hope Emma for a long moment, then made the sign of the cross. I knew, he said quietly. When your father told me the baby died, I didn't believe him. I've known Silas Blackthorn for 20 years, known what kind of man he truly is beneath all that respectability. I suspected what he'd done, but I had no proof, and He trailed off, looking ashamed. I was a coward. I said nothing. You can make it right now, Clara said, by testifying, by telling the truth. Father Miguel nodded slowly. Yes, I will do that. It's time someone stood up to Silas Blackthorn. Past time. With the priest's promise added to Lydia's and Thomas's testimonies, Jonah felt the first real stirring of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could actually win this. They parted ways in the cemetery, each heading in different directions. Thomas took the carriage. Father Miguel returned to the chapel to make his own preparations. And Jonah, Clara, and Lydia hurried toward the boarding house, moving quickly through the quiet Sunday streets. They'd almost made it when they ran into the first real trouble. A man stepped out from an alley as they passed, blocking their path. He was large, with a scarred face and mean eyes. Jonah recognized him immediately. Buck Morton, one of the drunks Silas Blackthorn occasionally hired for dirty work. The same man, Jonah realized with a jolt of fury, who'd probably been paid to dispose of Hope Emma in the first place. Well, Morton drawled, his words slurring slightly despite the early hour. What do we got here? That baby the whole town's been talking about? The one Mr. Blackthorn's looking for? Jonah moved in front of Lydia and Clara, placing himself between them and Morton. Walk away, Buck. Can't do that. Morton's hand went to his belt, where a knife handle protruded. Mr. Blackthorn's paying good money for information about that baby. Real good money. Think I'll collect. You're the one who threw her in the creek, Jonah said, his voice deadly calm. Aren't you? Morton grinned, showing yellow teeth. Might be. Job didn't stick, though. Should have held her under longer, I guess. The rage that swept through Jonah was unlike anything he'd felt before. This man, this worthless, evil man, had tried to murder a baby and was standing here grinning about it. Jonah's hands clenched into fists. Jonah, don't, Clara said urgently from behind him. He's armed. So am I. Jonah's hand went to his own belt, to the pistol he'd started carrying since Morales warned them about danger. He wasn't a violent man by nature, hadn't drawn a weapon on another human being since the war ended 20 years ago. But for Hope Emma, for this innocent child who'd almost died at this monster's hands, he'd make an exception. Morton saw the gun, and his grin faded. You really want to do this, Carter? In the middle of town? With witnesses? What witnesses? Jonah asked coldly. I don't see anyone around here but us. It was true. The street was empty, everyone still at their own churches or inside having Sunday breakfast. No one to see, no one to stop what might happen next. Morton's eyes darted left and right, realizing his vulnerability. Then his expression hardened and he lunged forward, knife flashing. Jonah was faster. He'd been tensed and ready, waiting for exactly this move. He sidestepped the knife thrust and brought his fist up hard into Morton's jaw. The impact sent the larger man staggering backward. The knife clattered to the ground. Behind him, Jonah heard Clara gasp, heard Lydia whisper a prayer in Spanish, but he didn't look away from Morton, who was on his knees now, blood dripping from his mouth. "You're going to tell Sheriff Morales everything," Jonah said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Who paid you? What you did? All of it." Morton spat blood. "Go to hell!" Jonah pulled his pistol and aimed it at Morton's head. His hand was perfectly steady. "Last chance." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Morton's shoulders sagged. Fine. I'll talk." They marched Morton to the sheriff's office, Jonah keeping the gun trained on him the whole way. A few people saw them passing and stared, but no one interfered. Morales wasn't in, he was at the Protestant church, but his deputy, a young man named Sam Henderson, was there. "Lock him up," Jonah told Henderson, shoving Morton toward the cells. "He just confessed to attempted murder." Henderson's eyes went wide, but he moved quickly to comply, clanging the cell door shut on Morton's protests. "Sheriff's going to want to hear about this." "He will, but first we need to get these ladies somewhere safe." Jonah turned to Clara and Lydia, who'd been waiting by the door with Hope Emma. "Let's go." They made it to Clara's boarding house without further incident. The building was a two-story structure on Elm Street, painted cheerful yellow with white trim. Clara led them inside to her private quarters on the ground floor, settling Lydia in a comfortable chair and taking Hope Emma to change her. Jonah stood by the window, watching the street, his heart still racing from the confrontation with Morton. His knuckles were bruised and swelling where they'd connected with the man's jaw. He flexed his hand, welcoming the pain. It felt good. Felt right. "You were very brave," Lydia said quietly from her chair. Jonah glanced at her. "I lost my temper. Could have gotten us all killed." "But you didn't. You protected us." She smiled weakly. "Elias would have done the same thing. He was a protector too, always putting himself between me and Papa's anger." "I'm sorry about Elias," Jonah said. "About what happened to him." Lydia's smile faded. "I keep hoping maybe he's alive somewhere. That maybe he got away. That maybe Papa's men didn't succeed. But I know that's just wishful thinking. Elias would never have stayed away if he was alive. He'd have come back for me." Clara returned with Hope Emma, freshly changed and content. "She's going to need a proper cradle soon, and more clothes." "I can make some, but—" "I have money," Lydia interrupted. "Not much, but I had a small inheritance from my mother that Papa couldn't touch. It's in an account in my name. We can buy whatever she needs." Over the next hour, they made plans. Real plans, detailed and practical. Where Lydia would sleep, what they'd tell people about why she was staying at the boarding house, how they'd keep Hope Emma safe and hidden until the legal proceedings began. Morales arrived partway through, summoned by his deputy, and listened to everything with his usual unflappable calm. "This changes everything," he said when they'd finished. With Lydia's testimony, Thomas's confirmation, Morton's confession, and Father Miguel backing it up, we've got a real case now, a strong one. "When will it go to trial?" Clara asked. "Soon. The circuit judge is due in Dust Ridge in 3 days for the regular session. We'll present everything then." Morales looked at Lydia. "You understand what you're committing to. Once you testify, there's no going back. Your father will disown you, publicly destroy your reputation, do everything in his power to paint you as unstable or immoral." "I understand," Lydia said firmly, "and I don't care. Let him try. I have the truth on my side, and I have my daughter." Morales nodded with something like respect. "Then we'll make this count." He left to continue building the case, and the three of them settled into an uneasy routine. Jonah stayed at the boarding house that night, sleeping in one of Clara's spare rooms, unwilling to leave Hope Emma unprotected. Around midnight, he woke to the sound of crying and got up to investigate. He found Lydia in Clara's sitting room, holding Hope Emma and crying silently. The baby was asleep, unaware of her mother's tears. "I thought she was dead," Lydia whispered when she saw Jonah. "For months, I thought my baby was dead. I wanted to die too. Every morning I woke up and wished I hadn't. And now she's here, alive, and it's like being given back something precious I thought was lost forever. But I'm so angry, Jonah. So angry at my father, at the world, at God for letting this happen." Jonah sat down beside her. "I know something about that," he said quietly. about losing someone and being angry. When my wife and daughter died, I was furious. At God, at the doctors, at myself for not being able to save them. That anger ate me alive for a long time. How did you get past it? I didn't, Jonah admitted. Not really. But Hope Emma helped. She gave me something to focus on besides my own pain, something worth fighting for. Lydia looked down at her sleeping daughter. She's so beautiful, so perfect. How could anyone want to hurt her? I don't know, but we're not going to let it happen again. I promise you that. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, two broken people finding solace in protecting the innocent life between them. Eventually, Lydia's tears dried, and she carried Hope Emma back to the bedroom Clara had prepared for them. Jonah returned to his own room but didn't sleep. He stood at the window, looking out at the dark street, thinking about what was coming. In 3 days, they'd face Silas Blackthorne in court. They'd expose his crimes, his cruelty, his attempted murder. And if they won, when they won, Hope Emma would be safe forever. But if they lost, Jonah refused to think about that possibility. They couldn't lose. Too much was at stake. A baby's life, justice for Elias, freedom for Lydia, and maybe, just maybe, redemption for a broken cowboy who'd found purpose again in saving one small, impossible life. He thought about Sarah then, about Emma, wondered what they'd think of all this, if they were watching from wherever the dead watched from. He hoped they'd understand, hoped they'd forgive him for giving his heart to another child, for finding a reason to keep living when he'd thought all reasons had died with them. The night deepened around him, and somewhere in the boarding house, Hope Emma slept peacefully, unaware of the battle being waged for her future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, but tonight she was safe, and that was enough. The 3 days before the trial passed in a haze of preparation and mounting tension. News spread through Dust Ridge like wildfire. Lydia Blackthorne had left her father's estate, was staying at Clara Dawson's boarding house, and the baby everyone had been talking about was allegedly her daughter. The gossip mills worked overtime, churning out wild speculation about what had really happened, why Silas Blackthorne's lawyers were descending on the town like vultures, and whether the upcoming court session would tear the community apart. Jonah spent most of those days at the boarding house, helping Clara manage the growing chaos. More than once, reporters from newspapers in Austin and San Antonio showed up, demanding interviews. Clara turned them all away with polite firmness, but their presence made everyone nervous. This was no longer a quiet local matter. It was becoming a spectacle. On the second day, Theodore Crane arrived. Jonah saw him from his boarding house window, a tall man in an expensive suit, stepping down from a private carriage with the kind of confidence that came from never having lost a case that mattered. He was followed by 2 assistants carrying leather cases full of documents. They went straight to the hotel where Silas had taken up residence, refusing to speak to anyone. "He looks like a snake," Clara observed, standing beside Jonah at the window. "Snakes are probably insulted by the comparison," Jonah muttered. That evening, Sheriff Morales came by with updates. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes from too many late nights building the case. He sat in Clara's parlor with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, reviewing his notes. "Crane's filed 17 different motions trying to get the case dismissed or delayed," he said, claiming everything from improper jurisdiction to procedural errors to bias. "Judge Whitmore's denied every single one, but it's slowing everything down, and there's something else." He hesitated, glancing at Lydia, who sat nearby holding Hope Emma. "What?" Lydia asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Your father's claiming you're mentally unstable, that the trauma of losing your baby drove you mad, that you're not competent to testify. Crane's demanding you be examined by a doctor before you're allowed on the stand." Lydia's face went white. "He's done this before. Whenever I disagreed with him, whenever I showed any sign of independence, he'd threatened to have me committed, said no one would believe a hysterical woman over him." "Will the judge allow it?" Clara asked, her hand moving protectively to Lydia's shoulder. "Whitmore's no fool," Morales said. "He knows what Silas is trying to do. But legally, if the defense makes the request, he has to at least consider it. I've arranged for Doc Vernon to do the examination instead of bringing in one of Silas's pet doctors. That should help." The examination took place the next morning in Clara's parlor. Vernon arrived early, his medical bag in hand and his expression grim. He spent an hour talking with Lydia, asking her questions about her health, her state of mind, her memories of the pregnancy and birth. Jonah and Clara waited anxiously in the kitchen, listening to the low murmur of voices through the wall. When Vernon finally emerged, he was shaking his head. "She's as sane as I am, probably more sane than half the people in this town, but I'll put it in writing, make it official. Silas won't be able to use that angle to discredit her." That afternoon brought another surprise. Thomas arrived at the boarding house, his weathered face set in determined lines. He'd been subpoenaed by Crane to testify for the defense, he said, but he wanted Morales to know he wouldn't lie under oath, not even to save his own skin. "I told Mr. Blackthorne I was done working for him," Thomas said, standing in Clara's parlor with his hat in his hands. "Told him what I thought of what he'd done. He threatened me, said he'd ruin me, have me arrested for conspiracy. I told him to go ahead and try. I'm too old to care about threats anymore." Lydia stood and embraced him. "Thank you, Thomas, for your courage, for everything." Thomas's eyes were wet when he pulled back. "I should have spoken up sooner, should have questioned things years ago. But I was loyal to the wrong man for too long. Can't change the past, but I can tell the truth now. That's all I've got left to give." The evening before the trial, Clara made a special dinner. Nothing fancy, fried chicken, biscuits, green beans from her garden, but she set the table with her good china and lit candles. It felt important somehow, this meal together. A moment of peace before the storm. Hope Emma sat in a cushioned basket on the table between them, awake and alert, her gray eyes moving from face to face as if she understood the significance of what was happening. She'd grown noticeably in the past week, her cheeks filling out, her movements becoming more coordinated. She reached for Jonah when he leaned over her, and his heart clenched with fierce love. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Lydia said quietly, looking at each of them in turn, "I want you to know, both of you, that you've given me back my life, my daughter's life. That matters more than any verdict." "We're going to win," Clara said firmly. "We have the truth on our side." "Truth doesn't always win," Jonah said, remembering too many times during the war when truth had been trampled under political convenience and power. "But we're going to fight like it does." They were still sitting around the table when someone knocked loudly on the front door. Jonah tensed immediately, his hand moving toward the pistol he'd taken to carrying. Clara went to answer it, and they heard her surprised exclamation, followed by the sound of multiple voices. Jonah stood and moved to the parlor doorway. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. His ranch hands, all 7 of them, stood crowded in Clara's small entryway. His foreman, Miguel Torres, stepped forward. "Boss, we heard about what's happening tomorrow, about the trial, and we wanted you to know we're with you, all of us." Behind Miguel, the others nodded. These were good men, hard-working men who'd been with Jonah for years. He thought they were just staying because the pay was decent and the work steady. But looking at their faces now, he saw something more. Loyalty. Friendship. "Miguel, you don't have to—" "Yes, we do," Miguel interrupted. "You're a good man, boss. Best we've ever worked for. And what Judge Blackthorne tried to do to that baby—" He shook his head, disgust clear on his weathered face. "That's evil, pure evil. We're going to be in that courtroom tomorrow, every one of us. And if Blackthorne's people try anything, they'll have to go through us first." Jonah found he couldn't speak. He just nodded, throat too tight for words. Over the next hour, more people arrived. The shopkeeper from the general store bringing supplies. 2 women from Clara's church offering to help watch Hope Emma during the trial. Father Miguel, promising to pray for them. Even some of the ranchers Jonah barely knew stopped by to express their support. "Word's gotten around about what really happened," one of them said. "Most folks in this county are sick of Silas Blackthorne running everything like it's his personal kingdom. Might be this is the chance to finally stand up to him." By the time everyone left, Clara's parlor looked like a supply depot. There was food enough for a week. Blankets, baby clothes that had been pulled from attics and closets, even a beautiful hand-carved cradle from old Mr. Jensen, who'd made it for his own grandchildren decades ago. "I never knew," Clara said wonderingly, looking at all the gifts. "I never knew so many people cared." "They care about doing what's right," Lydia said softly. My father's forgotten that most people still believe in basic decency. He thinks everyone can be bought or intimidated, but he's wrong. That night, Jonah couldn't sleep again. He lay in the spare room, staring at the ceiling, his mind running through everything that could go wrong tomorrow. Crane was a skilled lawyer, ruthless and clever. Silas had unlimited resources. The circuit judge, Whitmore, was supposed to be fair, but judges could be influenced in subtle ways. And even with all their witnesses, all their evidence, there was no guarantee of victory. Around 2 a.m, he heard footsteps in the hallway. A moment later, there was a soft knock on his door. "Come in," he said quietly. Clara entered, wrapped in a shawl, her hair loose around her shoulders. "I can't sleep either," she said. "Keep thinking about everything that could happen." "Same here." She crossed to the window where he'd been standing. For a while they just stood there together, looking out at the silent town. Finally, Clara spoke. "Jonah, if we lose tomorrow, if the judge awards custody to Silas, what will we do?" "We won't lose. But if we do—" Jonah turned to look at her. In the moonlight filtering through the window, her face was pale and beautiful and desperately worried. "Then we fight another way. Run if we have to. Take Hope, Emma, and Lydia somewhere Silas can't reach, Mexico maybe, or California. That would make you a fugitive. You'd lose everything." "I've lost everything before," Jonah said quietly. "I can do it again if I have to." Clara reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cool and soft against his calloused palm. "You're a good man, Jonah Carter. One of the best I've ever known." "I'm just doing what anyone would do." "No," Clara said firmly. "Most people would have walked away, would have found reasons why it wasn't their problem, why getting involved was too dangerous. But you didn't. You saved her, and then you stayed. That takes courage." "Or stupidity," Jonah said with a weak attempt at humor. Clara smiled, though her eyes were serious. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know, these past days, helping you care for Hope, Emma, working with you and Lydia, it's the first time since Henry died that I felt truly alive again, like I have a purpose beyond just existing. So thank you for that." "Clara." She squeezed his hand once, then let go. "We should try to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." After she left, Jonah lay back down, but sleep still wouldn't come. He kept thinking about what Clara had said, about purpose and feeling alive. She was right. He'd been dead inside for 3 years, and Hope, Emma, had brought him back. But it wasn't just the baby. It was Clara, too. The way she smiled at him over Hope, Emma's head. The way she anticipated what he needed before he asked. The way they'd fallen into a natural rhythm of caring for the baby together, like they'd been doing it for years instead of days. He wasn't ready to examine those feelings too closely. Not yet. Not while everything was still so uncertain. But they were there. Undeniable, growing stronger with each passing hour. Dawn came too quickly. Jonah rose and dressed in his best clothes. A clean shirt, pressed trousers, his good jacket that he only wore to funerals and weddings. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a stranger. A man who looked almost civilized, almost respectable. Not the broken, half-dead rancher who'd been going through the motions for 3 years. Hope, Emma, had done that, had pulled him back from whatever dark edge he'd been standing on and given him a reason to care about the future again. Downstairs, Clara was already making breakfast. Lydia sat at the table, pale and tense, barely touching her food. Hope, Emma, was in her new cradle, cooing happily and waving her tiny fists at the morning light streaming through the window. "The trial starts at 9, Lydia said, checking the clock on the mantel for the 10th time. "That's less than 2 hours." "We're ready," Clara said with more confidence than Jonah felt. "We have truth on our side. That has to count for something." At 8:30, Morales arrived with a wagon. He'd arranged for extra protection, 2 armed deputies who would escort them to the courthouse and stay close throughout the proceedings. The threat of violence from Silas's hired men was real, he warned. They needed to be careful. The courthouse was the largest building in Dust Ridge, a 2-story brick structure with white columns and a bell tower. By the time they arrived, a crowd had already gathered outside. Townspeople, ranchers from the surrounding area, reporters with notebooks and pencils. Everyone wanted to see the confrontation between the powerful Judge Blackthorne and the people daring to challenge him. Jonah climbed down from the wagon first, then turned to help Clara and Lydia down. Hope Emma was wrapped in a soft blanket, her face just visible. As they moved toward the courthouse steps, the crowd pressed closer, voices calling out questions. "Is that the baby? The one from the creek?" "Miss Blackthorne, is it true you're testifying against your own father?" "Mr. Carter, did you really save her life?" Morales and his deputies formed a protective barrier, pushing through the crowd. Jonah kept one arm around Clara and his other hand on Lydia's elbow, guiding them forward. He could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on them, could hear the whispers and speculation. Then the crowd ahead of them parted, and Silas Blackthorne stepped into view. Jonah had seen him before, of course. Everyone in 3 counties knew what Silas Blackthorne looked like. But he'd never been this close, never felt the full force of the man's presence. Silas was in his late 50s, tall and barrel-chested, with silver hair and a beard that gave him a distinguished, almost patriarchal appearance. He wore an expensive suit and gold watch chain. His eyes were cold and calculating, the eyes of a man who'd spent decades crushing anyone who opposed him. Those eyes fixed on Lydia, and his expression twisted with contempt. "Lydia, I'm disappointed. I raised you better than this." Lydia stopped walking, her whole body going rigid. Hope Emma sensed her mother's tension and started to fuss. For a moment, Jonah thought Lydia might break, might crumble under her father's glare. But then she lifted her chin and met his gaze directly. "You tried to murder my daughter," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. "My child. Your own grandchild. And you think I should be ashamed of opposing you?" Silas's jaw tightened. "That baby is a bastard born of your sin and stupidity. I did what was necessary to protect this family's reputation." "You killed Elias," Lydia continued, tears streaming down her face now, but her voice steady. "You murdered the man I loved and tried to kill his child, and you think that's protecting us?" The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Silas took a step forward, his face darkening with rage. "You ungrateful, hysterical, that's enough." Sheriff Morales moved between them, his hand resting on his gun belt. "Judge Blackthorne, I suggest you save your testimony for the courtroom. And I'd remind you that threatening witnesses is illegal." Silas stared at Morales for a long moment, then smiled. It was a cold, dangerous smile that made Jonah's blood run cold. "Sheriff, you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. When this is over, you'll be lucky if you're still wearing that badge." "Maybe," Morales said calmly, "but I'll be able to look myself in the mirror. Can you say the same?" Silas's smile faded. He turned and walked into the courthouse without another word, his lawyers trailing behind him like a flock of black-suited crows. The courtroom was packed. Judge Whitmore, a stern-looking man in his 60s with graying hair and wire-rimmed spectacles, sat behind the bench looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He called the court to order with several sharp raps of his gavel, and the murmuring crowd fell silent. "This is a custody hearing," Whitmore announced, his voice carrying through the room. "Not a criminal trial. We're here to determine what's in the best interest of the child in question, not to retry Judge Blackthorne's entire life. Both sides will present evidence and witnesses. I'll make my determination based on the facts presented. Is that clear?" Both legal teams nodded. Theodore Crane sat at the defense table looking supremely confident, his assistants arranging documents with practiced efficiency. Morales sat at the prosecution table. Technically, this wasn't a prosecution, but that's how everyone was thinking of it, with a much smaller stack of papers and a grim expression. "The defense may present their case first," Whitmore said. Crane stood smoothly. "Your Honor, this case is remarkably simple despite the dramatics that have surrounded it. Judge Silas Blackthorne is the grandfather and legal guardian of the child known as Hope Emma. The child was taken from Blackthorne property without permission and has been held by Mr. Jonah Carter and Mrs. Clara Dawson for over a week. We're asking that the child be immediately returned to her rightful family." "The child was thrown in a creek to die," Morales said, standing. "That changes things significantly." "Alleged," Crane said smoothly, "and based entirely on the word of dismissed servants and unreliable witnesses with axes to grind against my client. We have evidence that the baby was stolen, not rescued." "What evidence?" Whitmore asked sharply. Crane gestured to one of his assistants, who handed him a document. A sworn statement from Dr. Marcus Green, who examined Miss Lydia Blackthorne after her confinement. He states clearly that the child was stillborn, never drew breath. The baby Mr. Carter claims to have rescued cannot possibly be Judge Blackthorne's grandchild. The courtroom erupted. Jonah felt Clara's hand grab his arm, her fingers digging in hard. Lydia made a small, wounded sound beside them. Whitmore banged his gavel. "Order! I will have order!" When the room quieted, he looked at Crane. "You're claiming this is a different baby entirely?" "Yes, Your Honor. We believe Mr. Carter found an abandoned infant and, for reasons unknown, has fabricated this entire story to extract money or favor from Judge Blackthorne." "That's a lie." Jonah was on his feet before he realized he'd moved. "I pulled that baby from Copper Creek myself. She was in a sack." "Mr. Carter," Whitmore said sternly, "you'll have your chance to testify. Sit down." Jonah forced himself to sit, his hands shaking with rage. Beside him, Clara was pale as death. This was exactly what they'd feared. Silas using his wealth and connections to twist the truth, to make them look like criminals or con artists. Crane continued, presenting his case with smooth efficiency. He called Dr. Green, who testified under oath that Lydia's baby had been stillborn. He called 2 servants from the Blackthorne estate who swore they'd seen the dead infant before it was taken away for burial. He even produced a death certificate, properly filed and signed. It was all lies, Jonah knew. Bought testimony and forged documents. But it was presented so confidently, backed by such respectable witnesses, that he could see doubt creeping into the faces of the spectators, could see Judge Whitmore's expression becoming more skeptical. By the time Crane finished, 2 hours had passed and the defense had built what looked like an airtight case. Jonah felt sick. They were losing. Despite everything, despite the truth, despite their witnesses, they were losing to Silas Blackthorne's money and influence. Then it was Morales' turn. The sheriff stood slowly, and Jonah could see the determination in every line of his body. "Your Honor, the defense has presented a very tidy story, but it's a story built on lies and bought testimony. I'd like to call my first witness." "Proceed." "I call Rosa Alvarez to the stand." Rosa entered from a side door where she'd been waiting, escorted by a deputy. She looked terrified but determined. She took the oath with a shaking voice, then sat in the witness chair. Morales approached her gently. "Mrs. Alvarez, how long did you work for the Blackthorne family?" 15 years, Rosa said quietly. "And were you present when Miss Lydia Blackthorne gave birth?" "Yes, I helped with the delivery." "Can you tell the court what happened?" Rosa took a deep breath, and then the words came pouring out. She described the labor, the healthy baby girl who'd been born crying and strong. She described Silas's cold fury when he realized the child was healthy, his orders to have it disposed of. She described the lies he'd told Lydia, the grief that had nearly destroyed the young woman. Crane objected repeatedly, claiming hearsay, claiming Rosa was a disgruntled employee, but Whitmore overruled him each time, his expression growing darker as Rosa's testimony continued. When she finished, there were tears running down her face. "That baby we saw this morning, Hope Emma, she has a birthmark on her left shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. I saw it when she was born. If you check her now, you'll see the same mark." The courtroom exploded. Whitmore banged his gavel repeatedly. "We'll verify this claim. Sheriff, bring the child forward." Clara stood carrying Hope Emma. She unwrapped the baby's blanket and gently moved the dress aside. There, on Hope Emma's left shoulder, was a small crescent-shaped birthmark. "Let the record show the birthmark is present," Whitmore said, his voice tight. He looked at Crane. "Do you wish to cross-examine this witness?" Crane stood. "Mrs. Alvarez, you were fired from the Blackthorne household 3 weeks ago for theft, were you not?" Rosa's face flushed. "No, Answer the question. Were you terminated?" "I left because I couldn't stand by and—" "Yes or no, Mrs. Alvarez?" "Yes," Rosa whispered. "So you have reason to bear a grudge against Judge Blackthorne. Reason to lie about him." "I'm not lying." "No further questions," Crane said dismissively, sitting back down. Morales immediately stood for redirect. "Mrs. Alvarez, why did you really leave the Blackthorne household?" Because I couldn't live with what the judge had done. Because every time I saw Miss Lydia grieving, I knew her baby was alive somewhere and I'd done nothing to save her. The guilt was eating me alive. And you're willing to lose your livelihood, your reputation, to tell this truth? Yes, Rosa said firmly. Some things matter more than safety. That baby matters. Morales called Thomas next. The old guard's testimony was even more damaging. He described years of watching Silas Blackthorne destroy anyone who crossed him, described the beating Elias had taken before disappearing, described overhearing conversations about cleaning up problems and eliminating loose ends. Crane tried to paint him as senile, as confused, but Thomas stood firm, his voice never wavering. I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And I know Judge Blackthorne is capable of murder. I've been loyal to him for 15 years, and I'm ashamed it took me this long to speak up. Father Miguel testified about his suspicions, about the inconsistencies in Silas's story about the baby's death. The midwife, Martha Green, testified about being paid to lie, about the guilt that had haunted her. And finally, Buck Morton was brought from his cell to testify. Morton looked terrible, unshaven, disheveled, his face still bruised from where Jonah had hit him, but his testimony was devastating. He described in detail how Silas had hired him to dispose of the baby, how he'd tied her in a sack and thrown her in the creek, how he'd been promised $500 to keep quiet about it forever. Why are you confessing this now? Morales asked. Morton looked at Hope Emma, who was sleeping in Clara's arms. Because I got kids of my own, he said hoarsely, and because I can't live with what I almost did. That baby should have died, would have died if Mr. Carter hadn't found her. I can't take that back, but I can tell the truth now. By the time Morales finished presenting witnesses, it was late afternoon. The courtroom was silent, the weight of testimony hanging heavy in the air. Whitmore looked shaken, his usual stern composure cracking. Does the defense wish to present rebuttal witnesses? He asked. Crane stood. Your Honor, I'd like to call Judge Silas Blackthorne to the stand. Silas rose and walked to the witness chair with the same confidence he'd shown all day. He took the oath and sat down, his expression calm and slightly condescending, as if this whole proceeding was beneath him. Crane led him through a series of softball questions. Silas painted himself as a concerned grandfather, devastated by his granddaughter's death, shocked and hurt by the accusations being leveled against him. He denied everything, denied ordering the baby killed, denied having Elias beaten, denied paying witnesses to lie. These are the ravings of disgruntled servants and criminals, Silas said smoothly. I understand that Mr. Carter and Mrs. Dawson believe they're acting in good faith, but they've been deceived. The child they've been caring for is not my granddaughter. My granddaughter died 7 months ago, and her loss nearly destroyed my daughter. No further questions, Crane said, sitting down with evident satisfaction. Morales stood for cross-examination. He walked slowly toward the witness stand, and Jonah could see the calculation in his eyes. Judge Blackthorne, you claim your granddaughter was stillborn, yet we have multiple witnesses testifying she was alive and healthy. They're lying, Silas said flatly. All of them? Rosa Alvarez, who worked for you faithfully for 15 years? Thomas, who guarded your family with absolute loyalty? Father Miguel, a man of God? The midwife? Even Buck Morton, who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by confessing? They're all lying, or mistaken, or coerced. Silas's voice remained calm. You're not a lawyer, Sheriff. You're a peace officer playing at being an attorney. This whole case is built on speculation and emotional appeals. What about the birthmark? Morales asked. Rosa described it in exact detail before anyone had checked. How would she know about it if she hadn't seen this baby at birth? Coincidence? Birthmarks aren't unique. And Elias Navarro? What happened to him? Silas's eyes hardened. I have no idea. He stole from me and ran, that's all I know. Did you have him killed? Of course not. That's an outrageous accusation. Is it? Morales pulled out a document. I have a statement here from a ranch hand who witnessed 3 of your men beating Elias Navarro in the stable behind your estate. He says he heard you order them to make sure the Mexican never comes back. How do you explain that? For the first time, Silas hesitated. It was brief, just a fraction of a second, but Jonah saw it, saw the flicker of uncertainty cross those cold eyes. Hearsay, Silas finally said, and from another disgruntled employee, no doubt. Your daughter, Morales said, changing tactics. Miss Lydia Blackthorne. She believes her baby is alive. She's testified that she was kept prisoner during her pregnancy, that you lied to her about her daughter's death. Why would your own daughter lie about you? Because she's not well, Silas said, and for the first time there was real emotion in his voice, anger, barely controlled. She's been unstable since the pregnancy. Delusional. I've been trying to get her proper medical care, but these people, he gestured at Jonah and Clara, have been filling her head with fantasies. They've taken advantage of a young woman in mental distress. I see. So everyone who's testified against you is either lying, mistaken, coerced, or insane. Is that your position? That's the truth. No further questions? Morales said with disgust. Whitmore looked at both legal teams. Does either side wish to call additional witnesses? Morales glanced at Lydia, who nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I call Lydia Blackthorne to the stand. Lydia stood, and Jonah saw her hands shaking. Clara squeezed her arm once for encouragement, and Lydia walked to the witness stand on trembling legs. She looked so young sitting there, so fragile. But when she took the oath, her voice was clear and strong. Morales approached her gently. Miss Blackthorne, the baby we've been discussing, is she your daughter? Yes. Lydia looked directly at Silas as she spoke. Her name is Hope Emma, and she's my daughter. My father told me she died at birth, but he lied. He had her taken away and tried to have her murdered. How do you know this? Because I heard her cry, Lydia said, tears starting to flow. When she was born, I heard her cry, strong and healthy, and then they gave me something that made me sleep, and when I woke up, Papa told me she was dead. But I knew in my heart something was wrong. He wouldn't let me see her body, wouldn't let me have a proper burial. He said it was better to just forget, to move on. But a mother doesn't forget her child. Tell us about Elias Navarro, Morales said softly. Lydia's face crumpled. I loved him. We were going to run away together, start a new life. But Papa found out I was pregnant, and She had to stop, compose herself. He had Elias taken from the ranch. I never saw him again. Papa said he ran off to Mexico, but I don't believe that. Elias would never have left me. Never. What do you think happened to him? I think my father had him killed, Lydia whispered, just like he tried to have Hope Emma killed, because we were inconvenient, because we threatened his precious reputation. Silas shot to his feet. This is outrageous. Your Honor, my daughter is clearly disturbed. Sit down, Judge Blackthorne, Whitmore said sharply. You'll have your chance to respond. Continue, Miss Blackthorne. Lydia looked at Hope Emma, who was awake now and watching everything with those serious gray eyes. She's all I have left of Elias, the last piece of the love we shared, and I will not let my father take her from me again. I will not let him win. She turned to face Silas directly, and when she spoke, her voice rang through the courtroom with absolute conviction. You're a monster, Papa. You destroyed everything I loved, everyone I cared about. You tried to kill your own grandchild to protect your reputation. But you failed. She lived. And now everyone's going to know what kind of man you really are. The courtroom erupted in chaos. People were shouting, some supporting Lydia, others defending Silas. Whitmore banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Silas looked like he wanted to climb over the railing and strangle his daughter with his bare hands. His face was purple with rage, veins standing out in his forehead. You ungrateful bitch, he snarled, loud enough for everyone to hear. After everything I've done for you, every opportunity I gave you, you gave me nothing but pain, Lydia screamed back. You killed the man I loved and tried to murder my child. You're not my father. You're a devil. Order. Whitmore's gavel came down like a gunshot. I will clear this courtroom if there's one more outburst. Judge Blackthorne, sit down immediately or I'll have you removed. Silas slowly sank back into his chair, but his eyes never left Lydia's face. The hatred there was palpable, and Jonah felt Clara move closer to him, seeking comfort. Does counsel wish to cross-examine? Whitmore asked Crane, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. Crane looked at his client, clearly calculating. Attacking Lydia after that testimony would only make things worse. No, Your Honor, no questions. Then we're adjourned until tomorrow morning, at which time I'll hear closing arguments and render my decision." Whitmore stood, and everyone rose automatically. He looked directly at Silas. "And Judge Blackthorne, you're confined to the hotel until this matter is resolved. You'll go nowhere without a deputy escort. Am I clear?" Silas's jaw worked, but he nodded stiffly. As the courtroom emptied, Jonah moved to Lydia, who'd collapsed in the witness chair, sobbing. Clara was already there, arms around the younger woman, murmuring comfort. Hope Emma had started crying too, sensing the distress around her. "You did it," Jonah said quietly to Lydia. "You told the truth. You were incredible." "He looked at me like he wanted to kill me," Lydia whispered. "My own father wanted to kill me." "He's not your father anymore," Clara said firmly. "He gave up that right when he tried to hurt Hope Emma. We're your family now. All of us." They left through a side door to avoid the crowds, Morales and his deputies forming a protective barrier around them. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It should have been beautiful, but Jonah couldn't appreciate it. His entire body was tense, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped an hour later, just as they were settling into Clara's boarding house for the evening. A deputy came running, his face pale and frightened. "Sheriff!" he gasped. "It's Judge Blackthorne. He's gone." Morales was on his feet instantly. "What do you mean, gone?" "He left the hotel. We had a man watching, but somehow Blackthorne slipped past. And his horse is missing from the stable. He could be anywhere." Jonah felt ice flood his veins. He looked at Clara, saw his own fear reflected in her eyes. Silas was loose, angry, and desperate, and they all knew what desperate men were capable of. "Double the guards," Morales ordered. "Get men on every road out of town, and someone stays here with them." He pointed at Jonah and the others. "Nobody moves until we find Blackthorne." But even as the deputies scrambled to follow orders, Jonah knew it was too late. Silas was coming to finish what he'd started, and this time there might be no one to stop him. Hope Emma whimpered in Clara's arms, and Jonah reached over to stroke her soft hair. "It's all right, sweetheart," he murmured, trying to convince himself as much as the baby. "We're going to keep you safe. I promise." But as night fell over Dust Ridge and the house fell into tense, watchful silence, Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was only just beginning. The house settled into an uneasy quiet as darkness deepened over Dust Ridge. 2 deputies stood guard outside Clara's boarding house, their rifles gleaming in the lamplight spilling from the windows. Inside, Jonah sat in the parlor with his pistol on the table beside him, every nerve on edge, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Clara had taken Lydia and Hope Emma upstairs to one of the back bedrooms, the most defensible room in the house with only one window and a solid door that could be barred from inside. Morales had left an hour ago to coordinate the search for Silas, promising to return before midnight with updates. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jonah found himself checking the clock every few minutes, watching the hands move with maddening deliberateness. 9 o'clock became 9:30, then 10. Still no word. Around 10:15, Clara came back downstairs. She'd changed into a simple house dress and let her hair down, but there was nothing relaxed about her posture. She moved to the window and peered through the curtains at the deputies outside. "Lydia finally got Hope Emma to sleep," she said quietly. "But she's terrified. Keeps saying Silas will find a way to get to us, that he always wins." "Not this time," Jonah said, trying to inject confidence he didn't entirely feel into his voice. Clara turned to look at him. "You can't know that." "No," Jonah admitted, "but I can promise we'll fight with everything we have. That's got to count for something." She crossed to the sofa and sat down, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if you hadn't found her. If you'd ridden past that creek a few minutes earlier or later, if Copper hadn't spooked, if you hadn't heard her crying. All these tiny chances that had to line up perfectly for Hope Emma to survive." "Sarah used to call those moments divine appointments," Jonah said, the memory surfacing unexpectedly. "She believed nothing happened by pure chance, that there was a pattern to things, even if we couldn't always see it. Do you believe that?" Jonah was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I didn't. Not after Sarah and Emma died. Couldn't see the divine purpose in taking a good woman and an innocent baby. But now, He gestured toward the stairs, toward where Hope Emma slept. Now I don't know. Maybe there was a reason I was the one who found her. Maybe I needed to save her as much as she needed to be saved. Clara reached over and took his hand, the gesture feeling natural and right. I'm glad you found her. For her sake, obviously, but also for yours. You were dying, Jonah. Maybe not physically, but in every way that matters. And she brought you back. She brought both of us back, Jonah said, looking at their joined hands. You were just as lost as I was. Yes, Clara agreed softly. Yes, I was. They sat like that for a while, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Then Clara spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. When this is over, if we win, what happens then? What do you mean? Hope, Emma, Lydia, us. Clara's thumb traced circles on the back of Jonah's hand. We've become something these past days, something like a family. But families need structure, need plans, and I don't know what the plan is. Jonah hadn't let himself think that far ahead, had been so focused on the immediate crisis that he hadn't considered what came after. Lydia's her mother, he said slowly, working through it as he spoke. She should be the one raising her. But Lydia's barely more than a girl herself. She's been sheltered her whole life, controlled by Silas. She'll need help, support, a place to live. She can stay here with you. I'll provide financial support from the ranch. Clara shook her head. That's not what I'm asking, Jonah. I'm asking what you want. Not what makes sense logically, not what's proper or expected. What do you want? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Jonah knew what she was really asking, knew they were dancing around something that had been building since that first night caring for Hope Emma together. But saying it out loud felt dangerous, felt like tempting fate when everything was still so uncertain. I want, he said carefully, to be part of Hope Emma's life, to watch her grow up, to be there for her. And I want... He trailed off, unable to finish. What? Clara pressed. What else do you want? You, Jonah said, the word coming out rough and honest. I want you. Want to come home to you every evening, want to sit across the table from you at breakfast. Want to build something real with you. But it's too soon, Clara. Sarah's only been gone 3 years, and Henry has been gone too, Clara interrupted. And I've spent every one of those days feeling like half a person. Until you walked through Doc Vernon's door with Hope Emma in your arms and reminded me what it felt like to be whole. She turned to face him fully. I'm not asking for promises or declarations, Jonah. I'm just asking if you feel what I feel. If these past days have meant as much to you as they have to me. They have, Jonah said, his voice thick with emotion. God help me, they have. Clara smiled, and even in the dim lamplight she looked beautiful. Then that's enough for now. We'll figure out the rest as we go. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together in the quiet house, listening to the creaks and settling sounds of old wood, the distant barking of dogs, the muffled voices of the deputies outside. Jonah couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this kind of peace, this sense of rightness despite the danger surrounding them. Then a floorboard creaked upstairs and they both tensed. Probably just Lydia checking on Hope Emma, Clara said, but her voice was uncertain. They waited, listening. Another creak, then another. Footsteps moving down the upstairs hallway, but going the wrong direction. Not toward the back bedroom where Lydia and Hope Emma were sleeping, but toward the stairs. Jonah grabbed his pistol and stood in one smooth motion. Clara was right behind him. They moved to the base of the stairs and looked up into the darkness of the second-floor landing. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Not Lydia, too tall, too broad. For one heart-stopping moment, Jonah thought it was Silas. Thought somehow he'd gotten past the guards and into the house. His finger tightened on the trigger. Then the figure stepped into the light spilling up from below, and Jonah saw it was one of Clara's boarders, an elderly traveling salesman named Mr. Patterson, who'd been staying in the front room for the past week. Sorry, Patterson said, raising his hands when he saw the gun. Didn't mean to startle you, just came down for a glass of water. Jonah lowered the pistol, his heart still racing. Apologies, Mr. Patterson. We're all a bit on edge tonight. Understandable, given the circumstances. Patterson descended the stairs slowly, his arthritis making each step careful. Whole town's talking about what happened in court today. That baby you folks have been protecting, she's Judge Blackthorn's grandchild? Yes, Clara said, and he tried to have her killed. Patterson shook his head sadly. I've been traveling this circuit for 30 years, seen a lot of powerful men do terrible things. But trying to murder your own grandchild, that's a new low even by those standards. He moved past them toward the kitchen. Don't worry, I'll be quiet. Won't disturb the ladies upstairs. After Patterson had gotten his water and returned to his room, Jonah and Clara resumed their vigil in the parlor, but the moment of peace had been broken. Now every sound made them jump, every shadow seemed threatening. Around 11:30, one of the deputies knocked on the door. Jonah answered it with his gun in hand, relaxing slightly when he saw it was young Sam Henderson. Any news? Jonah asked. Sam shook his head. Sheriff's got men searching everywhere, but it's like Blackthorn vanished into thin air. His horse is gone, but nobody saw which direction he rode. Could be halfway to Mexico by now, for all we know. Or he could be circling back, Jonah said grimly, waiting for us to let our guard down. That's what Sheriff Morales thinks, too. He's pulling in extra men, setting up checkpoints on all the roads leading out of town. If Blackthorn tries to leave, we'll catch him. But that wasn't what worried Jonah. What worried him was the possibility that Silas had no intention of leaving, that he was out there in the darkness right now, planning something desperate and violent. Sam returned to his post, and Jonah closed the door. He was turning back to Clara when he heard it, a sound from the back of the house, faint but distinct. Breaking glass. Upstairs, Jonah hissed at Clara. Get to Lydia and Hope Emma. Bar the door and don't open it for anyone but me or Morales. Clara's face went white, but she nodded and ran for the stairs. Jonah moved toward the back of the house, his pistol raised. The sound had come from the kitchen area, where a window looked out onto the small yard behind the boarding house. He entered the kitchen slowly, every sense alert. The window above the sink was broken, shards of glass scattered across the counter and floor. The curtain fluttered in the night breeze, and standing in the shadows near the door was a figure. Jonah brought his gun up, but before he could fire, the figure spoke. Don't shoot, Senor Carter, please. I am not here to hurt anyone. The voice was young, male, heavily accented, Mexican. The figure stepped forward into the thin moonlight coming through the broken window, and Jonah saw he was barely more than a boy, maybe 20 years old, thin and ragged-looking, with desperate eyes. Who are you? Jonah demanded, keeping the gun trained on the intruder's chest. My name is Elias Navarro, the young man said, and I have come for my daughter. For a moment, Jonah couldn't process what he'd heard. Elias Navarro, Lydia's lover, the man everyone thought was dead. But here he stood, alive and breathing and looking at Jonah with a mixture of hope and terror. That's impossible, Jonah said. You're dead. Silas had you killed. He tried. Elias touched his side and Jonah saw him wince. His men beat me, shot me, left me in a ravine to die. But a Mexican family found me, nursed me back to health. It took months before I could walk again, before I was strong enough to travel. And when I finally made it back to Dust Ridge, I heard the stories. About a baby found in a creek, about Lydia testifying against her father. I knew it had to be our child. Jonah slowly lowered his gun, though he didn't holster it. This could still be a trick, some scheme of Silas's. How do I know you're telling the truth? I can prove who I am. Lydia has a scar on her left shoulder from when she fell from a horse when she was 8. She told me about it, said her father was furious because it wasn't ladylike to show weakness, and she has a small tattoo on her ankle, a tiny bird. She got it in secret when she turned 18, her one act of rebellion. Elias's voice broke. Please, I just want to see her, to see my daughter. I have been searching for them for so long. The details were too specific to be fabricated, and there was something in the young man's face, a desperation and love that reminded Jonah of his own feelings for Hope Emma. He made a decision. Wait here, he said. Don't move. Don't make a sound. I'm going to get Lydia. He backed out of the kitchen, keeping Elias in sight until he reached the hallway. Then he turned and took the stairs 3 at a time. The door to the back bedroom was barred as he'd ordered. He knocked softly. Clara, it's me. Open up. He heard shuffling, then the bar being lifted. Clara opened the door a crack, her face pale in the lamplight. Behind her, Lydia stood holding Hope Emma, who was miraculously still sleeping. "What's happening?" Clara whispered. "We heard glass breaking." "Someone broke in through the kitchen window," Jonah said, "but I don't think he's here to hurt us. Lydia, I need you to come with me, now." "Why? Who is it?" Jonah looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes, and decided to just say it. "He says his name is Elias Navarro." Lydia swayed. For a moment, Jonah thought she might faint. Clara grabbed her arm, steadying her. Hope Emma woke and started to fuss. "That's not possible," Lydia breathed. "Elias is dead." Papa said, "What if he was wrong? What if Elias survived?" Jonah held out his hand. "Come see for yourself." Lydia handed Hope Emma to Clara with shaking hands, then followed Jonah down the stairs. Her legs were unsteady, and she had to grip the railing to keep from falling. They made their way to the kitchen, where Elias still stood exactly where Jonah had left him. When Lydia saw him, she made a sound, half sob, half scream. Elias's face crumpled with emotion. "Lydia," he said hoarsely. "Mi amor, mi vida." Lydia crossed the kitchen in 3 running steps and threw herself into his arms. They crashed together with desperate force, both of them sobbing, hands clutching at each other as if to prove this was real. Elias buried his face in Lydia's hair, his whole body shaking. Lydia clung to him like he might disappear if she let go. "You're alive," she kept saying over and over. "You're alive, you're alive, you're alive." "They couldn't kill me," Elias said into her hair. "I had too much to live for. I had to get back to you." Jonah turned away, giving them privacy, and found Clara standing in the kitchen doorway with Hope Emma. She had tears streaming down her face, and when she met Jonah's eyes, he saw the same wonder he felt reflected there. Against all odds, against everything they'd been told, Elias had survived. Hope Emma's father was alive. After several minutes, Lydia and Elias finally pulled apart enough to look at each other properly. Elias cupped Lydia's face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "When I heard about the baby in the creek," he said, "when I heard you were testifying that she was our daughter, I couldn't believe it. I thought our child was dead. Your father told me she'd been stillborn, laughed about it when his men were beating me, said it was God's punishment for our sin." "He lied," Lydia said fiercely. "About everything. She was alive, Elias. Our daughter was alive, and he tried to murder her." "Where is she?" Elias looked around the kitchen, his eyes desperate. "Where is our daughter?" Clara stepped forward, and Elias's gaze fixed on the bundle in her arms. His face transformed, years of pain and loss washing away in an instant. "That's her? That's our baby?" "Yes," Lydia said, fresh tears flowing. "Her name is Hope Emma. Hope because she survived the impossible. Emma because," her voice broke, "because in those few seconds after she was born, before they took her away, I looked at her and knew that was her name." Clara gently placed Hope Emma in Elias's arms. The young man stood frozen, staring down at his daughter with an expression of absolute awe. Hope Emma blinked up at him with those solemn gray eyes, then reached up and grabbed his nose with one tiny hand. Elias laughed, a sound of pure joy that seemed to fill the kitchen. "She's beautiful. She's perfect." He looked at Lydia. "She has your eyes. And your smile," Lydia said, moving to stand beside him so they could both look down at their daughter. "When she smiles, I see you." They stood like that, the 3 of them, a family reunited against impossible odds. Jonah felt Clara's hand slip into his, felt her lean against his side. This moment was sacred somehow, a light shining through all the darkness of the past days. Then reality intruded in the form of the deputies bursting through the front door, drawn by the sounds of breaking glass and voices. Sam Henderson came charging into the kitchen with his rifle raised, took in the scene, and froze in confusion. "What in the... Who's this?" "Elias Navarro," Jonah said calmly. "Hope Emma's father. He's not a threat." "But we thought he was dead." "Apparently not," Clara said with a shaky laugh. "Apparently miracles still happen." Sam looked thoroughly bewildered, but he lowered his rifle. Sheriff's going to want to hear about this. And we're going to need to secure that broken window before—" He never finished the sentence. The front door slammed open again, and this time it wasn't a deputy. Theodore Crane strode in, followed by 3 hard-looking men Jonah recognized as Silas Blackthorne's hired guns. They all had weapons drawn. "Nobody move," Crane said coldly. "Judge Blackthorne has issued a warrant for the arrest of everyone in this house. You're all charged with kidnapping, conspiracy, and harboring a fugitive." "That's insane," Morales said, appearing behind Crane with his own gun drawn. "Judge Blackthorne doesn't have the authority to issue warrants right now. He's not acting as a judge. He's a defendant." "He has friends in high places," Crane said with a thin smile. "Friends who signed the necessary papers. Now, I'll take custody of the child, and you'll all come peacefully to jail where you belong." "Like hell," Jonah said, moving to stand between Crane and Elias, who was still holding Hope Emma. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Fingers tightened on triggers. Everyone was poised on the knife edge of violence. Then a voice rang out from the doorway, commanding and authoritative. "Mr. Crane, I suggest you holster your weapon before you find yourself disbarred and facing charges of your own." Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway was Judge Whitmore, still in his nightshirt but with a coat thrown over it and a decidedly unimpressed expression on his weathered face. Behind him were 2 federal marshals, their badges gleaming in the lamplight. "Your Honor," Crane said, clearly caught off guard, "I wasn't aware you'd been summoned." "I wasn't summoned. I came of my own accord when I learned Judge Blackthorne had escaped custody and was likely planning something rash." Whitmore stepped into the kitchen, the federal marshals flanking him. "And I brought federal law enforcement because I suspected corruption at the local level." "Seems I was right." Crane's face went pale. "I have a warrant, signed by Judge Harold Morton, who happens to be Silas Blackthorne's brother-in-law and who has no jurisdiction in this county," Whitmore said flatly. "That warrant is worth less than the paper it's written on, and attempting to execute it constitutes abuse of process. Marshals, please escort Mr. Crane and these gentlemen outside while I sort this mess out." The federal marshals moved forward with quiet efficiency. Crane and Silas's hired guns had no choice but to comply, though the lawyer's face was twisted with fury as he was led away. Sam Henderson looked like he wanted to cheer. Once they were gone, Whitmore turned to the small group huddled in the kitchen. His eyes went to Elias, still holding Hope Emma, and his eyebrows rose. "And who might you be?" "Elias Navarro, Your Honor," Elias said, his voice steady despite the fear Jonah could see in his eyes. "Hope Emma's father. The young man Silas Blackthorne supposedly killed." It wasn't a question. Whitmore studied Elias for a long moment, then nodded. "Well, this changes things considerably. Sheriff Morales, I'll need a full statement from Mr. Navarro. Attempted murder is a serious charge, and if he can provide evidence—" "I can," Elias said. "I know where they left me for dead. I know the names of 2 of the men, and I still have the bullet they put in me. The doctor in Mexico removed it and gave it to me." Whitmore's expression was grim. "Then Silas Blackthorne's problems just got significantly worse. But first, we need to find him. Where is he, Bet?" As if summoned by the question, the sound of hoofbeats thundered outside. Someone shouted. A gunshot rang out, then another. Everyone rushed to the windows. Outside in the street, a figure on horseback was charging toward the boarding house. Even in the darkness, Jonah recognized Silas Blackthorne's broad frame. The man was riding hard, a rifle in one hand, his face twisted with fury and desperation. He fired again, and one of the deputies went down. "He's lost his mind," Morales breathed. "He's actually going to try to—" Silas didn't slow down. He rode straight for the house, clearly intending to crash through the front door or die trying. More shots rang out from the deputies, but they went wide. Silas was almost to the porch when his horse suddenly reared, spooked by something. Silas lost his grip and fell hard, the rifle flying from his hands. He was up in an instant, scrambling for the weapon. But Morales was faster. The sheriff burst through the front door and tackled Silas before he could reach the rifle. They went down in a tangle of limbs, both men fighting with desperate strength. Jonah ran outside to help, with several others right behind him. By the time they reached the 2 men, Morales had managed to get Silas's arms pinned behind his back, and was wrestling him into submission. The federal marshals arrived and snapped iron cuffs on Silas's wrists. "You can't do this!" Silas roared, still struggling even though he was clearly beaten. "I'm a judge! I have rights!" "You have the right to remain silent," Whitmore said coldly, appearing in the doorway. "And I strongly suggest you exercise it before you make this worse for yourself." Silas's eyes found Lydia, who'd followed everyone outside. His face contorted with rage. "You did this! My own daughter, destroying everything I built. That baby should have died. She was supposed to die." The words hung in the air, loud enough for everyone to hear. Several of the townspeople who'd been drawn by the commotion gasped. Even Crane, still being held by one of the marshals, looked shocked. "Did he just," Clara started, "confess to attempted murder in front of half the town?" Whitmore finished. "Yes, he did. Mr. Blackthorne, you've just made my job considerably easier." Silas seemed to realize what he'd done. His face went slack with horror, then hardened into cold fury. "It doesn't matter. You can't prove anything. I'll fight this. I have resources, connections." "You have nothing," Lydia said, her voice ringing clear in the night air. She walked toward her father with Hope Emma in her arms, Elias right beside her. "You destroyed your own life with your pride and cruelty, and now everyone knows what you really are." She stopped a few feet away from him, and Jonah saw Silas's expression shift when he looked at the baby in her arms. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of what might have been love once, long ago. But then it was gone, replaced by cold hatred. "That baby is an abomination," Silas spat. "A bastard born of sin." "That baby," Lydia said quietly, "is your granddaughter, and she's worth 1,000 of you." She turned her back on him then, a gesture of such finality that it seemed to break something in Silas. He lunged forward with a roar, but the marshals held him fast. They dragged him away toward a waiting wagon, his curses and threats fading into the distance. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, people talking in low, shocked voices. The deputy who'd been shot was being tended to by Doc Vernon, who'd arrived during the chaos. "The wound was minor," Vernon announced, "just a graze. He'd be fine." Slowly, everyone made their way back into the boarding house. Jonah found himself sitting in Clara's parlor once more, but this time the room was crowded. Lydia and Elias sat close together on the sofa, Hope Emma asleep between them. Clara sat beside Jonah, her hand in his. Morales stood by the fireplace, and Judge Whitmore had taken the armchair, looking exhausted. "Well," Whitmore said after a long silence, "this has been quite possibly the most dramatic case I've ever presided over, and I've been a circuit judge for 23 years. "What happens now?" Lydia asked quietly. "With my father, with Hope Emma, with all of this?" Whitmore considered the question. "Your father will face trial for attempted murder, conspiracy, and likely a dozen other charges once we start digging. With his confession tonight, witnessed by multiple people including 2 federal marshals, he'll almost certainly be convicted. As for custody of Hope Emma," he looked at the sleeping baby, then at Lydia and Elias. "Under normal circumstances, I'd award custody to the parents, but Mr. Navarro was thought to be dead and Miss Blackthorne is unmarried. There will be talk, scandal. Then we'll get married," Elias said immediately. "Tomorrow, if possible. I want to marry Lydia anyway, have wanted to since the day I met her. We'll make everything legal and proper." Lydia turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "You still want to marry me? After everything that's happened?" "I'd marry you if the whole world was against us," Elias said, taking her hand. "You and Hope Emma, you're my family. You're all I need." Whitmore nodded slowly. "That would certainly simplify matters legally. Father Miguel can perform the ceremony. And as for custody," he looked at Jonah and Clara, "I understand you two have been instrumental in caring for Hope Emma, in saving her life." "We did what anyone would do," Jonah said. "No," Whitmore said firmly. "You did what most people would be too afraid to do. You stood up to a powerful man and put yourselves at risk to protect an innocent child. That takes courage, and I want to make sure that courage is recognized." He leaned forward. "I'm prepared to grant custody to Elias and Lydia, but with a stipulation. Hope Emma will need godparents, people who can watch over her and step in if anything happens to her parents. I'd like to officially name you both as her legal guardians, secondary to her parents, but with full rights to make decisions about her welfare if the need arises." Jonah looked at Clara, saw his own surprise and emotion reflected in her face. "Your Honor, we'd be honored," Clara said softly. "Good. Then it's settled." Whitmore stood, wincing as his back cracked. "I'll have the papers drawn up tomorrow. The hearing will reconvene at noon, at which time I'll issue my formal ruling. But I think we all know how this is going to end. Justice, for once, is going to prevail." After Whitmore left with the marshals, the house finally began to settle. Morales stayed long enough to coordinate with his deputies, ensuring the guards would remain through the night even though the immediate danger had passed. Then he too departed, promising to return in the morning. Elias and Lydia took Hope Emma upstairs to the back bedroom. Jonah heard them talking in low voices, heard the soft sounds of a family reuniting after being torn apart. It was a sound that filled him with both joy and a bittersweet ache. He and Clara remained in the parlor. The house creaked around them, settling into quiet. Clara leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "We did it," she said wonderingly. "We actually won." "Yeah," Jonah agreed, "we did. Jonah, what Judge Whitmore said about being guardians. You understand what that means, don't you? That we'll be part of Hope Emma's life, that will help raise her. And that means you and I—" Clara trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. Jonah knew what she was asking. Being joint guardians meant being a team, being partners in every sense that mattered. It meant building a life together, whether they made it official or not. "Clara Dawson," he said slowly, "I know this is fast. I know we've only really known each other a week, but these have been the most important days of my life since Sarah died, and I can't imagine going back to the way things were before. Can't imagine not having you in my life." Clara turned to look up at him, her eyes shining with tears. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I'd like to court you properly, take you to dinner, to church socials, all the things people do when they're building something real. And then, if you'll have me, I'd like to marry you. Make this family we've stumbled into official." Clara's smile was radiant. "Jonah Carter, I thought you'd never ask." He kissed her then, soft and gentle, a promise of things to come. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying. Upstairs, Hope Emma made a small sound in her sleep, and somewhere in the Texas night, a new day was beginning. A day that would bring justice, healing, and the start of something beautiful built from the ashes of tragedy. Morning came soft and golden, the kind of perfect Texas dawn that seemed designed by Providence for new beginnings. Jonah woke in Clara's spare room to the sound of Hope Emma cooing downstairs, and for the first time in 3 years, he didn't wake with that crushing weight of grief on his chest. The pain of losing Sarah and Emma would always be there, he knew, woven into the fabric of who he was, but it no longer defined him. He'd found a way to carry it alongside hope instead of letting it consume him entirely. He dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Clara already in the kitchen making breakfast, her hair caught up in a loose bun, flour dusting her apron. The domesticity of the scene caught him off guard, the normalcy of it after days of crisis and danger. She looked up when he entered and smiled, and Jonah felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "Morning," she said, her voice warm. "Elias and Lydia are in the parlor with Hope Emma. I thought we could all eat together before heading to the courthouse." In the parlor, Jonah found Elias sitting on the floor with Hope Emma in his lap, making funny faces that had the baby giggling with delight. Lydia sat on the sofa watching them, her face transformed from the pale, haunted look she'd worn just yesterday. She looked younger now, lighter, as if a terrible burden had been lifted from her shoulders. "She likes you," Jonah said to Elias, settling into the armchair. Elias looked up, his smile wide and genuine. "She's perfect. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this will all be a dream, that I'll still be in that ravine, dying, and none of this will be real." "It's real," Lydia said softly. "All of it. We have our daughter back, we have each other, and today, if you still want to, we can get married." "If I still want to?" Elias laughed. "Lydia, I've wanted to marry you since the day you brought me water in the stable and didn't treat me like I was less than human because of the color of my skin or the accent in my voice. Everything I've done since then has been about getting back to you." Clara appeared in the doorway. "Breakfast is ready, and Jonah, there's someone at the door asking for you." Jonah went to the front door and found Miguel Torres, his ranch foreman, standing on the porch with his hat in his hands. Behind him, the other ranch hands waited on horseback. "Boss," Miguel said, "we wanted to escort you to the courthouse. Make sure nothing happens on the way. After last night, we're not taking chances." Jonah felt emotion tighten his throat. "Miguel, you don't have to—" "Yes, we do," Miguel interrupted firmly. "You're family, boss, and family looks out for each other." They ate quickly, the meal punctuated by Hope Emma's happy babbling and the nervous energy of knowing what lay ahead. Around 10 o'clock, they began preparing to leave. Clara dressed in her best Sunday dress, deep blue with white lace at the collar. Lydia borrowed one of Clara's gowns, a soft gray that made her eyes look even more striking. Hope Emma wore the white dress with blue embroidery that Clara had made, looking like a tiny angel. The ride to the courthouse was surreal. Miguel and the ranch hands formed a protective circle around the wagon, but they needn't have worried. As they moved through town, people came out of shops and houses to watch. But instead of hostility or judgment, Jonah saw something else in their faces: respect, support, even admiration. Mrs. Henderson from the general store called out, "God bless you all." An older rancher Jonah barely knew tipped his hat. 3 women from Clara's church stood on a corner holding a hand-painted sign that read, "Justice for Hope Emma." "They're on our side," Clara whispered, wonder in her voice. "The whole town is on our side." The courthouse steps were crowded with people, but they parted to let the group through. Inside, the courtroom was even more packed than it had been yesterday. Every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls. The air hummed with anticipation. Judge Whitmore was already at the bench, looking considerably more composed than he had in the middle of the night. He banged his gavel as Jonah and the others took their seats at what had been the prosecution table. Across the aisle, Theodore Crane sat alone, his assistants conspicuously absent. He looked diminished somehow, his earlier confidence shattered. "We'll dispense with formalities," Whitmore announced. "Last night's events have rendered much of the previous testimony moot. Judge Silas Blackthorne is currently in federal custody facing multiple serious charges, including attempted murder, conspiracy, and corruption. He will not be present for these proceedings." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Whitmore's gavel came down sharply. "The matter before this court is the custody of the minor child Hope Emma Blackthorne Navarro. I've reviewed all testimony, examined the evidence, and spoken with the parties involved. I'm now ready to issue my ruling." The room fell absolutely silent. Jonah felt Clara's hand slip into his, felt Lydia tense beside him. Hope Emma, oblivious to the gravity of the moment, played with a cloth doll Clara had given her. "First," Whitmore said, "I want to acknowledge the extraordinary courage shown by several individuals in this case. Jonah Carter, who found this child and saved her life despite having no obligation to do so. Clara Dawson, who opened her home and her heart to help care for an abandoned infant. Sheriff Tom Morales, who pursued justice even when it meant standing up to the most powerful man in the county. Rosa Alvarez and Thomas Garrett, who risked everything to tell the truth. Father Miguel, who added his voice to theirs. And most especially, Lydia Blackthorne, who found the strength to stand against her own father to protect her child." He paused, and Jonah saw emotion flicker across the judge's normally stern face. "This case has reminded me why I became a judge in the first place. To ensure that justice isn't just for the wealthy and powerful, but for everyone, especially the most vulnerable among us. A baby thrown into a creek to die is about as vulnerable as it gets." Whitmore picked up his gavel. "Therefore, I hereby grant full custody of Hope Emma Blackthorne Navarro to her natural parents, Elias Navarro and Lydia Blackthorne. Furthermore, I'm appointing Jonah Carter and Clara Dawson as the child's legal guardians and godparents, with full rights to act in the child's interest should her parents be unable to do so." The courtroom erupted in applause. Lydia burst into tears, burying her face in Elias's shoulder. Hope Emma, startled by the noise, started to cry until Clara scooped her up and soothed her. Jonah found himself shaking hands with what felt like half the county, people pressing forward to congratulate them. Whitmore banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order, we're not finished yet." When the room quieted, he continued. "I'm also issuing a permanent restraining order against Silas Blackthorne. He is not to contact, approach, or communicate with Hope Emma, Lydia Navarro, or Elias Navarro in any way. Violation of this order will result in immediate incarceration." "Your Honor," Crane said, standing on shaky legs, "I must protest. My client—" "Your client," Whitmore interrupted icily, "confessed to attempted murder in front of 24 witnesses last night. He's facing a minimum of 20 years in prison, possibly more. I suggest you focus on damage control rather than protesting my custody ruling." Crane sat down heavily, his face ashen. Whitmore's gaze swept the courtroom. "I'm also recommending that the State Bar Association investigate Judge Blackthorne's conduct during his tenure on the bench. Based on what I've learned in this case, I suspect there are many other instances of corruption and abuse of power that need to be brought to light." He stood, and everyone rose automatically. "This court is adjourned, and may God have mercy on Silas Blackthorne's soul, because I certainly won't." The celebration that followed was unlike anything Dust Ridge had seen in years. Someone produced a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and before long the courthouse lawn had transformed into an impromptu party. Food appeared as if by magic. Women brought pies and casseroles from their homes. The hotel contributed a case of champagne. The saloon owner rolled out a barrel of beer. Father Miguel found Elias and Lydia in the crowd. "I understand congratulations are in order twice over. Custody of your daughter and a wedding?" "If you're willing to perform the ceremony, Father," Lydia said. "Today, if possible. I don't want to wait another moment to make this official." "Then we'll do it right now," Father Miguel declared. "Here, in front of the whole town. Let everyone see that love triumphs over hate, that family is built on choice and commitment, not just blood." Word spread quickly, and within minutes the crowd had formed a makeshift aisle leading to the courthouse steps. Lydia had no wedding dress, but Clara pinned wildflowers in her hair and lent her a cream-colored shawl. Elias stood at the top of the steps in his borrowed clothes, looking nervous and proud and deeply happy. Jonah walked Lydia down the makeshift aisle, since she had no father to do it. Silas had forfeited that right, and everyone knew it. As they walked, Lydia whispered, "Thank you for everything, for saving Hope Emma, for standing with me, for being the father mine never was." You saved yourself," Jonah said quietly. "You found the courage to fight for your daughter. I just helped a little." At the top of the steps, he placed Lydia's hand in Elias's and stepped back to stand beside Clara, who was holding Hope Emma. The baby was awake and alert, her gray eyes taking in everything with that solemn intelligence that always seemed remarkable for someone so small. Father Miguel's voice rang out clear and strong. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Lydia and Elias in holy matrimony. This couple has already faced more trials than most people endure in a lifetime. They've been separated by violence, reunited by miracle, and now stand before us ready to commit their lives to each other and to their daughter." The ceremony was simple but profound. Elias's voice shook when he said his vows, promising to love and protect Lydia for the rest of his days. Lydia cried through hers, but her words were clear and firm. They exchanged rings, simple bands that Rosa had somehow procured from the general store, and when Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in cheers. Elias kissed Lydia with a tenderness that made several women in the crowd dab at their eyes. Then they turned to face everyone, and Jonah handed Hope Emma to them. The new family stood together on the courthouse steps, and someone captured the moment with a camera, a photograph that would eventually make its way into newspapers across Texas, becoming a symbol of justice prevailing against corruption. The celebration continued into the evening. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jonah found himself standing apart from the crowd for a moment, just watching. Elias and Lydia danced with Hope Emma between them, the baby's delighted laughter carrying on the breeze. Rosa and Thomas stood talking with Father Miguel, all three of them looking lighter somehow, unburdened. Sheriff Morales was deep in conversation with Judge Whitmore, probably discussing the upcoming trial of Silas Blackthorne. Clara appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. What are you thinking about? How much can change in such a short time, Jonah said. 2 weeks ago, I was alone on my ranch, going through the motions of living. Now look at this. A baby saved, a family reunited, justice served. It's almost too much to believe. It's real, Clara said, echoing what Lydia had said that morning. All of it. And it's just the beginning. The beginning of what? Clara turned to face him, her expression serious despite the smile playing at her lips. Of our life together, if you still meant what you said last night, about courting me, about marriage. I meant every word, Jonah said firmly. Clara, I know it's fast. Stop, she interrupted. Stop worrying about how fast it is, or what people will think. We've both been alone long enough. We've both grieved enough. And life is too short and too precious to waste time being cautious when you found something real. You're right, Jonah said, feeling something settle in his chest. So let's not waste time. Clara Dawson, will you marry me? Are you proposing without a ring in the middle of a town celebration? Clara laughed, but her eyes were bright with tears. That's not very romantic. I'll propose properly later, with a ring and flowers and everything traditional. But I need you to know right now, this moment, that I love you, that I want to build a life with you, that I want to wake up every morning and see your face, that I want to help you raise Hope, Emma, and any other children we're blessed with, that I want to grow old with you and... Clara kissed him, stopping the flow of words. When she pulled back, she was definitely crying now. Yes, you impossible man. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it. This time when they kissed, several people in the crowd noticed and started applauding. Jonah broke away, embarrassed, but Clara just laughed and waved at their friends. Miguel Torres let out a whoop and started a chant of "Kiss her again" that quickly spread through the crowd. So Jonah did, and this time he didn't care who was watching. The next 3 months passed in a blur of change and growth. Silas Blackthorne's trial became a sensation that drew reporters from as far away as New York. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Attempted murder, conspiracy, corruption, bribery, and a dozen other charges that multiplied as investigators dug deeper into his affairs. Buck Morton testified in exchange for a reduced sentence. Rosa and Thomas gave depositions. Elias described his beating and near murder in harrowing detail. But the most damning testimony came from an unexpected source. Martha Green, the midwife who'd been paid to lie about the baby's death, had kept meticulous records of every illegal payment Silas had made to her over the years. Not just for Hope Emma, but for other questionable situations she'd been asked to cover up. Her ledger became the prosecution's most valuable piece of evidence. Silas was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 30 years in prison. He'd be an old man if he ever got out, and everyone knew he probably wouldn't survive that long. His empire crumbled almost overnight. The bank was seized by federal regulators who found evidence of fraud. His ranch lands were sold at auction to pay his legal debts and compensate his victims. The Blackthorne name, once synonymous with power in 3 counties, became synonymous with corruption and cruelty. Lydia refused to use the name anymore. She was Lydia Navarro now, and she wore that identity with pride. Jonah and Clara were married in late January, 3 months to the day after he'd pulled Hope Emma from Copper Creek. The wedding was held in the main Protestant church, which was packed to capacity. Hope Emma served as flower girl, toddling down the aisle on wobbly legs with Rosa guiding her, scattering dried petals from a basket. She'd grown so much in those 3 months, had started walking and babbling in a mix of English and Spanish that delighted everyone who heard it. Clara wore Sarah's wedding dress, which she'd altered to fit. Jonah had worried it might feel wrong somehow, like he was betraying Sarah's memory. But when he'd mentioned the dress to Clara, she'd said Sarah would want her dress to be worn again, to be part of something beautiful. It's not replacing her. It's honoring her memory while moving forward. And she'd been right. Standing at the altar, watching Clara walk toward him in that dress, Jonah felt Sarah's presence not as a weight of grief, but as a blessing, a sense that she approved of this new chapter in his life. The ceremony was beautiful. Hope Emma clapped her hands when they kissed, making everyone laugh. At the reception afterward, held at Clara's boarding house, which had been decorated with flowers and ribbons, Elias and Lydia announced they were expecting another child. The room erupted in congratulations, and Clara squeezed Jonah's hand, her eyes asking a silent question. Jonah nodded. They'd been talking about having children of their own, and yes, he was ready, more than ready. The four adults had decided to pool their resources and buy a piece of land together, not Silas's old ranch, which held too many bad memories, but a beautiful stretch of property 15 miles north of Dust Ridge, with good water and rich soil. They'd build 2 houses there, close enough to support each other but far enough apart for privacy. A place where Hope Emma could grow up surrounded by people who loved her, where her future siblings could run and play in safety. Jonah's ranch hands agreed to move with him, forming the core workforce for the new venture. Miguel would serve as foreman for both families, coordinating the work. It would be hard, building something from scratch, but they were all young and strong and motivated. The spring after the trial, they broke ground on the new property. Jonah and Elias worked side by side, digging post holes and raising beams, their friendship growing stronger with each shared task. Clara and Lydia planned the houses together, debating about kitchen layouts and bedroom sizes with the easy familiarity of sisters. Hope Emma thrived in the wide open spaces. She learned to call Jonah Papa Joe and Clara Mama Clara, while reserving Mama and Papa for Lydia and Elias. The four adults never corrected her or tried to establish rigid boundaries. They'd all agreed that Hope Emma was blessed to have 4 parents who loved her, and that was more important than worrying about labels or traditional family structures. On a warm evening in May, almost a year after Hope Emma had been found in Copper Creek, the 4 adults sat on the porch of the nearly completed main house. Hope Emma was asleep inside, exhausted from a day of exploring. Lydia was heavily pregnant now, due in just a few weeks. Clara had recently learned she was expecting as well, though she was only a few months along. "I've been thinking," Lydia said, one hand on her swollen belly, "about what we should tell Hope Emma when she's older, about how she came to be here, about what happened with my father." "The truth," Elias said immediately. "She deserves to know the truth." "But carefully," Clara added, "age appropriately. We tell her the story of how she survived, how she was saved, how many people fought for her. We make sure she understands she was wanted and loved even when she was in danger." "We tell her that family isn't just blood," Jonah said, "that the people who showed up for her, who protected her, who chose to love her, those people are her real family. Blood just tells you where you came from, but love tells you where you belong." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over their land. In the distance, they could see Miguel and the other hands finishing up the day's work on the barn. Smoke rose from the cookhouse chimney, the smell of dinner drifted on the breeze. "I never thought I'd be happy again," Lydia said quietly. "After Papa took Elias from me, after I thought I'd lost my baby, I wanted to die. Every day was just another day of pain. But now—" She gestured at the land, the houses, the life they were building. "Now I have everything I never dreamed I could have." "God works in mysterious ways," Elias said, his English much improved after months of practice. "He took us through the fire, but he brought us out stronger." Clara rested her head on Jonah's shoulder. "I keep thinking about that morning when you brought Hope Emma into Doc Vernon's office. How scared she was, how close to death. And now look at her, running around, laughing, completely unaware of the miracle she represents." "She'll know," Jonah said. "When she's older, we'll make sure she knows. We'll tell her about Rosa's courage, about Thomas standing up for what was right, about Father Miguel and Sheriff Morales and everyone else who fought for her. We'll tell her that she was loved by an entire town, protected by people who'd never even met her." "And we'll tell her about you," Lydia said, looking at Jonah with tears in her eyes. "How a broken cowboy heard her whisper, 'Mama,' and decided she was worth saving. How he risked everything, his safety, his reputation, his life, to protect a baby that wasn't even his." "She was always mine," Jonah said softly. "From the moment I pulled her out of that creek and she grabbed my thumb. She chose me as much as I chose her." Inside the house, Hope Emma woke and started calling for them. "Mama, Papa, Papa Joe, Mama Clara." Her voice was plaintive, wanting reassurance that they were near. All 4 adults rose simultaneously, smiling at each other. They went inside together to comfort her, and Hope Emma's face lit up when she saw them all. She reached out her arms, wanting to be held by everyone at once. So they sat on the floor in a circle with her in the center, and she moved from lap to lap, giving kisses and receiving hugs, utterly secure in the knowledge that she was loved beyond measure. 5 years later, Hope Emma stood on the same porch holding her baby brother's hand. James Elias Navarro was 3 years old, energetic and fearless. Hope Emma, now 6, had appointed herself his protector and took the job seriously. Behind them in the house, Clara's twin daughters, Emma Sarah and Anna Marie Carter, named for the grandmothers they'd never meet, were napping upstairs. They were 2 years old, identical in looks but completely different in personality. Emma was quiet and thoughtful like Jonah. Anna was spirited and bold like Clara. The houses had been completed years ago, and the ranch was thriving. They ran cattle and horses, grew crops, and had even started a small orchard. The land was beautiful and productive, a testament to what could be built through hard work and cooperation. Hope Emma had grown into a bright, confident child with her mother's gray eyes and her father's warm smile. She knew her story, how she'd been found in a creek, how she'd been saved, how many people had fought for her. She wore the knowledge like a badge of honor, understanding that she'd been wanted and loved even in the darkest circumstances. On this particular afternoon, she was waiting for the weekly gathering that had become tradition. Every Sunday, the extended family came together for dinner, not just Jonah, Clara, Elias, and Lydia, but Rosa and Thomas, who'd become like grandparents to all the children, Father Miguel, who'd remained a close friend, Sheriff Morales and his wife, Doc Vernon, Miguel Torres and his growing family. They'd formed their own kind of family, bound not by blood but by shared experience and mutual love. And at the center of it all was Hope Emma, the child who'd brought them together, who'd shown them all that love was stronger than hate, that justice could prevail, and that families were built through choice and commitment. "Papa Joe," Hope Emma called, seeing Jonah ride up on Copper, the same horse that had spooked at her cries 6 years ago. The gelding was older now, moving more carefully, but still reliable. "Can James and I help with the horses?" "If you're careful," Jonah called back, dismounting, "and if you promise to listen to Miguel." Hope Emma nodded seriously, already tugging her brother toward the barn. Jonah watched them go, his heart full. He thought about the man he'd been 6 years ago. Hollow, broken, just going through the motions of living. That man was gone, replaced by someone who understood that life was precious and fragile and worth fighting for. Clara emerged from the house with a baby on her hip, their youngest, Daniel, just 8 months old. She'd gained a little weight with each pregnancy and never lost it all, and Jonah loved every curve, every sign of the life they'd built together. "They're arriving," Clara said, nodding toward the road where wagons were appearing in the distance. "I should get the food ready." "I'll help," Jonah said, taking Daniel from her. The baby immediately grabbed his father's nose, giggling. "Though I might be more of a hindrance than a help." Clara kissed his cheek. "You're perfect exactly as you are." The afternoon unfolded with the comfortable chaos of a large gathering. Children ran everywhere, their laughter ringing through the air. Adults clustered in small groups, talking about crops and weather and town gossip. Food covered every surface: roasted meats, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, pies and cakes. At one point, Rosa pulled Jonah aside. She was older now, her hair more gray than black, but her eyes were still sharp and kind. "I want you to know something," she said. "That night I came to you, when I told the truth about what Judge Blackthorne had done. That was the first time in my life I'd ever stood up to a powerful man. I was terrified. But you and Clara and Lydia, you showed me that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about doing the right thing even when you were afraid." "You saved Hope Emma's life by coming forward," Jonah said. "We couldn't have won without you." Rosa shook her head. "No, mijo. You saved her life by refusing to give up on her. I just told the truth. You fought for her." As evening approached and the sun began its descent, Lydia stood and called for everyone's attention. She was holding a package wrapped in brown paper, and her face was nervous but excited. "Elias and I wanted to give you all something," she said, "something to commemorate what we've built here, the family we've chosen." She unwrapped the package to reveal a large photograph in a beautiful wooden frame. It was the picture taken on the courthouse steps the day Lydia and Elias had married, the two of them with Hope Emma, surrounded by Jonah, Clara, Rosa, Thomas, Father Miguel, Sheriff Morales, and a dozen others. Every face radiated joy and triumph. "This is who we are," Lydia said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not the family circumstances tried to give us, but the family we chose to become, and I wanted everyone to have a copy to remember." She'd had copies made for each household, and as she distributed them, people wiped away tears and hugged each other. When she got to Jonah and Clara, she said, "You saved my life as much as you saved Hope Emma's. You showed me that it was possible to stand up, to fight back, to choose a different path. I'll never be able to repay that." "You already have," Clara said softly, "by letting us be part of Hope Emma's life, by trusting us with your family. That's all the repayment we need." As the party wound down and families began departing, Hope Emma tugged on Jonah's hand. "Papa Joe, will you tell me the story again? About how you found me?" Jonah picked her up, settling her on his hip even though she was getting too big for it. "Which part do you want to hear?" "The beginning. When you heard me crying." So Jonah told her the story once more, the story she never tired of hearing. About the cold November morning, about Copper spoking at an unusual sound, about finding a burlap sack in the creek, about pulling her out and hearing her whisper, "Mama," about riding hell-bent for town, about refusing to give up on her even when things looked darkest. Hope Emma listened with rapt attention, as she always did. When he finished, she said, "And then everyone fought for me. Mama and Papa and Mama Clara and Papa Joe and Rosa and Thomas and Father Miguel and Sheriff Morales and the whole town, because I was worth fighting for." "Because you were worth fighting for," Jonah confirmed. "Because every child is worth fighting for. And because love is stronger than hate, Hope Emma. Always remember that. Love always finds a way." Hope Emma nodded seriously, then squirmed to get down. She ran off to play with her brother, and Jonah watched her go with a full heart. Clara appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" "That Sarah was right," Jonah said. "About divine appointments, about there being a pattern to things. I was meant to find Hope Emma that morning. Meant to save her, meant to bring all these people together, everything that happened, all the pain, all the loss, all the grief. It led me to that moment. And that moment led to all of this." He gestured at the scene before them, the houses they'd built, the land they'd cultivated, the children playing in the fading light, the family they'd chosen spreading across the porch and lawn like a living tapestry of love and commitment. "It led to home," Clara said simply. "It led you home." Jonah pulled her close, watching Hope Emma chase her brother through the grass, her laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The little girl who'd been thrown away like trash, who'd been left to die in a frozen creek, who'd defied all odds to survive. She was thriving now, surrounded by love, protected by people who'd chosen to fight for her. And in saving her, they'd all saved themselves, had found purpose, had found family, had found proof that even in the darkest circumstances, light could break through, that justice could prevail, that love could triumph over hate. Hope Emma would grow up knowing this truth, would carry it with her into adulthood and eventually pass it on to her own children. And decades from now, when she was old and gray, she'd still tell the story of how a broken cowboy heard her whisper "Mama" and decided she was worth saving. How that single act of compassion had rippled outward, touching dozens of lives, creating a family bound not by blood, but by choice and courage and unwavering love. How sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to give up on someone, even when the whole world says they're lost. Because love always finds a way. And family, real family, is the people who refuse to give up on you, no matter what. That was Hope Emma's story. And it was also Jonah's and Clara's and Lydia's and Elias's and everyone else who'd been brave enough to stand up and fight for what was right. It was a story worth telling, a story worth remembering, a story worth living. And as the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jonah Carter held his wife close and watched their chosen family celebrate the miracle of a life saved and lives transformed, and knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Home.